November 27th, 2021 at 6 p.m. And I would ask that if you are able to please stand and give the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would the clerk please take roll call?
Certainly. Mayor Pro Tem C.R.S.
Present.
Member Anderson.
Present.
Member Cuesta.
Present.
Member Russell.
Present.
Member Ward.
Present.
Member Wink, absent. Mayor Olson.
Here.
6 present and 1 absent, being Member Wink.
Thank you. Our first agenda item of the study session is agenda item 4, which is recommendations for code enforcement from the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee. And our chair of Code Enforcement Advisory, Julie Bowden, is here along with our vice chair, Green, and member Dickerson, who's present to answer questions as well. So thank you for being here. And go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Mayor Olson.
You need to pull it quite close to your...
It's been a while since
I
I've
know,
been
and
here.
it works well if you pull it up close.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Olson. Good evening, City Council members. It's good to see everybody finally again. As Mayor Olson stated, I'm Julie Bowden, the chair of the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee, and to the right of me is the vice chair, Carson Green. And we're here to talk to you about the emerald ash borer infestation. So there we go. So what we thought we would start with is a review of how we changed municipal code at the last meeting. I think there was some questions about how municipal code has changed, so we thought we would review that with you. Then we wanted to talk a bit about the emerald ash borer issue. It's a reminder for you all, but for those that are hearing it for the first time and watching today, they'll learn a little bit about why we're so concerned. We'd like to cover with you the actions that the committee has taken, and then we have some recommendations for our tree shrub code. Okay, so in the past 2 years, we've come to City Council with 2 different code changes, and both of them have followed the same process. The committee sends a recommendation to the City Council liaison. The liaison and the committee presents the recommendation to City Council. If Council agrees, then the Council directs the City Attorney to work with us to address the recommendations and put it into legal language. And then the City Attorney presents the draft ordinance to City Council. I think it may be confusing because code enforcement focuses primarily on Title 15, some of 6, 7, 11, and 12, but other departments and other committees have responsible for the rest of the code. I don't know what their processes are, but that may be why it feels different every time it comes to you. Okay, so the EAB issue. And again, this is a reminder for you all, as Dave Lee has presented several times on the issue, but I'm going to call it EAB, but it stands for emerald ash borer. It is considered the most destructive tree insect pest ever to be introduced in North America. It attacks and kills both healthy and stressed trees. We estimate that there's 22,500 ash trees on private property in the City of Englewood. The borer has been confirmed in Boulder, Gun Barrel, Longmont, and several other surrounding cities, and is expected to spread to Inglewood in the next 3 to 5 years. And ideally, if we can treat the ash trees before the infestation occurs or remove trees that aren't doing so well now, then we can better protect our tree canopy. But the bottom line is our tree canopy is at risk, but we have the opportunity right now to address code, possibly develop some programs or resolutions to help property owners when it does occur. some of the actions that we have taken since we learned about EAB. We wanted to understand what the threat was and what steps to take in order to prevent, mitigate, and respond to an infestation. In order to do that, we met with staff to learn about EAB. That was primarily Dave Lee, and then to learn about existing tree shrub code today, and that was primarily with Dave Lewis. We also researched surrounding cities on what their current code was on trees and shrubs, and we also wanted to understand what programs or resolutions they had in place to help citizens with protecting the tree canopy. We worked with the communications department in order to educate the community and build resources now before the infestation occurred. You've probably seen, if you follow Inglewood's social media, the communications department has done a really good job of communicating to the community. And then finally, we evaluated the tree shrub code. Currently in progress, we're identifying programs that we think may help property owners save mature, healthy ash trees and to remove or replace ash trees. But we're not going to address that today. We'll come back to you later when we have that finalized. So today we'll just be talking about code changes. In terms of the needs analysis, what we did is we brainstormed what we ideally thought would be best for the City of Englewood and its property owners. And based on that analysis, we identified several things that were of concern to us. I'm not going to go through all of those, but you can see. And we use those to bounce against our current code to see how well we were covered in that area. And we determined that there are several changes that we recommend so that we can protect our tree canopy and encourage property owners to plant and maintain healthy trees. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair Green to continue.
What do you hit on here?
The right button.
Okay. So, hello, Mayor Olson and council members. So, based on what Chair Bowden just went over, those were all the different things we considered and thought about as we, considered what might make sense to recommend. And these are the things that we identified that really do, fall to the top of what should be addressed. So the first one's kind of obvious. Currently, our code does not prohibit ash trees, and we think it should for any new trees. And we also, from what my understanding is, that you can't even buy ash trees anymore. They're not selling them around here, but they still can grow and spread. And so we want to make it so that no one's starting any new ones. We want to clarify and simplify the tree preservation and removal procedures, because currently that's not totally clear, and that's kind of mixed in with number 3 as well, the protect trees in right of way. Currently the code says property owners are responsible for right of way, and we want to make sure that that's what makes sense and is clear in the code or as far as, because the city may want to take control of ash trees in the right of way in some cases. If they're unhealthy, if they're not being handled, that needs to be clarified. Who is responsible and what the city can and can't do regarding trees that are in the right of way, someone's outside strip, et cetera. And then, currently Inglewood is Tree City USA, and we want to make sure that that's clear that we really care about trees. I mean, Inglewood traditionally has been, it's even in our logo. We've always been about trees, and we want to make sure that we make it clear that we have a commitment to the tree canopy. Yeah. So in prohibiting ash trees, we're recommending in 11-5-8 to add ash trees to the list of prohibited plantings. And then one of the things that's in there that's confusing and doesn't appear to be accurate is the definition of mature trees. We may want to change what the definition of mature trees is. Right now, it's anything over an inch, which is pretty tiny. And it's not a standard definition across what we saw from all the other municipalities. So that should be reviewed. And then in 1667, also, there's another point where we need to add ash trees to the list of prohibited species. In 11-5-6, under preservation and removal procedures, this is, what we're talking about in regard to making it clear under, like that first bullet right now, city ordered tree preservation and removal applies to prohibited trees as well as dead, dying trees on public or private property. It doesn't currently have prohibited trees in the code. Clarify property owner versus city responsibilities. I already touched on this, but there's some question that when we went through this, as far as what Code Manager Lee expressed is, ideal and what the city can and can't do. There's some ambiguity in there, and we want to review that with the city attorney to make sure that the city has the ability to best deal with the problem while also recognizing and honoring property rights. And then utilize the already established Title 15 nuisance abatement process instead of the more complex penalty process. There's currently a whole separate penalty process around tree and shrub in the code, and we don't think it makes sense, and we've heard other feedback that it would make things easier for the courts and overall if it was switched to be just under the standard Title 15 abatement process, so it'd be more standardized fines and process for dealing with issues. This 1155 is specifically about the owner's responsibility for right-of-way. We just want to make sure that the definitions are very clear, because to us they weren't totally clear, and it's not completely clear about what the homeowner can do versus what an arborist can do as well. That should be more clear. And then in 11-5-1, we want to add a goal and purpose to emphasize the importance of the tree canopy. Establish authority for trees in Inglewood. Currently, Parks and Rec is responsible for the care of trees on city-owned property. At least that's the understanding that we got from Dave Lee. There used to be a definition of a city arborist in the code, but that was changed. And we just want to review that and make sure that the way that that's set up makes the most sense. And there is a related, one of the standards for being a Tree City USA city relates to the established authority. And Dave Lee did inquire about that, and we've been assured that our current status is solid on that standard one. But if there's anything that that the city attorney thinks we could do to adjust the definition to make that more clear, it may be worth doing so. And then we want to encourage property owners to plant and maintain diverse and desirable trees through programs, assistance in purchasing, selecting, planting, maintaining trees in order to expand the tree canopy. I think that's it for our specific points, and then we've got time for questions, comments, anything you want to ask us about.
Thank you. So council, do you have questions for this, comments? Member Russell.
Thank you, and thank you, Julie and Carson and Colleen for presenting. I do have one question, because I know we've talked about this in the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee in the past about some other dangerous or nuisance trees. Will these changes take care of some of those problems as well, do you think?
Well, I know, you mean like Siberian elm and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, part of what we've put most of our emphasis on the emerald ash borer because that's this impending, crisis that's coming our way. But in discussing what trees should be included or excluded, or primarily excluded from code, we figured that would be part of the discussion with the city attorney to go over. And we have a lot of information from all the other city codes that we went through because we broke that up among us. We all dug into all different city codes to figure out what they're doing. So we have the lists of the various ones that are excluded everywhere else around. And then between the city attorney and Dave Lee, we do think that the overall list should be adjusted, not just the EAB.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for all the work you've done on this.
Mayor Pro Tem Sierra.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you very much to the CEAC on your presentation, and also taking a proactive approach to something that potentially could be affecting our city here in the near future. I have a question regarding the second slide where it talks about the tree preservation and removal procedures. I'm trying to think, it's slide 13 within our deck, but it's towards the back.
Is that it?
That is it. Okay, so one, I guess, a couple questions I'll ask them consecutively here. One, do we have anything in the code that states that code enforcement can issue something that does state if you have a dead tree on your property that it can, basically we can summons you or state something in terms of that tree? And then secondly, I'm guessing an elm tree is going to be pretty expensive to remove off a property if there was something along those lines. So did CEAC consider the monetary impact of that if we were to move forward with this clarification on number 2 here?
I can start.
Sure.
Yeah, so with if it's a healthy tree, the cheapest thing to do would be to treat it. And our understanding is that's about $100 a year. I think it's 100 to 150 a year to have a tree that's healthy treated, and the only way to save a tree is to pre-treat it. So if the bug gets to it at all, you can't save it. So once the bug's gotten into it, you can't start treating it then. You have to pre-treat it. So people who have healthy big trees, the cheapest option would be to start treating it right away, pay that. And that's why we want to encourage people to be aware of that. And certainly if it's a large tree, I mean, it can be thousands to remove them. And that's one of the things that Chair Bowden mentioned. We think we should be considering programs to assist homeowners, especially people who may not be able to afford it. We haven't formalized any proposals around that, but that's one of the things we're working on and that we want to come back to you all with some recommendations around.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
And regarding the question about code, whether or not it covers the ability to take down a diseased tree, the current code does have a process in place that if a tree is identified and diseased, there's summons that are given, but the process takes a lot longer than it should. It's more like 45 days, whereas the abatement process in Title 15 is shorter.
Thank you, Chair Bowden.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chair Bowden and Mr. Green, for the presentation. Appreciate it. The question I have, and this probably will just show my ignorance about ash trees or trees in general, but is this, do we know if the ash borer is something that kind of moves through an area and then moves on, not to return, or is this kind of with us indefinitely, do we know, or for many years or something like that?
I don't think either of us know for sure, but our impression from talking to Dave Lee and from all of what, at least my impression from everything I've read about it, is that it becomes endemic.
Okay.
Like Boulder, I think, was one of the first places in the Front Range that got it, and they still have it. I mean,
Right.
I don't believe that they expect it to go away. I think they see it as endemic.
Okay. That was really the question I had, was if it's something that moves on, then I don't know how permanent we would want to make banning ash trees in the code, but if we do, if it is, it makes sense to me to do that if it looks like it's going to be something that's with us for the long term. So, thank you.
Actually, banning ash trees was something that was brought to our attention. Other cities, instead of having a list of trees that are banned, they use the term nuisance trees, and then they have a city forester that defines what a nuisance tree is. So there's a way to get around that and not have to specifically ban
Have it in code,
every
right?
tree. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Councilmember Ward.
First question is in regards to what you mentioned for a healthy tree. You talked about a 1 inch. You said you had a variety of ideas from different municipalities on what that was. Do you have a basic ballpark range for how that went?
I couldn't quite hear you.
Yeah, the trunk width on a tree, 1 inch, I think you said, for considered to be a healthy tree. Do you have a ballpark idea of what the range was for other municipalities in the research that you did?
Off of the top of my head, I believe it's 12 inches. But again, we're not recommending the changes to make to code. That's something that we want the city attorney to look at. There is conversation that maybe we should just remove that clause altogether about mature trees.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the other was in response to Member Anderson's previous statements. I generally do not support administrative decisions that determine what activity is legal or illegal. I believe that should be done legislatively by this body. And as much as this body is empowered to change the Inglewood Municipal Code nearly at will through a procedure, I would not support empowering city staff with the decision of what tree could or could not be planted in a specific yard.
Do you mean like if we were to say in code that there was an arbitrary list of nuisance trees, you'd rather have it be specific?
Correct. I'd like to see those specifically codified as opposed to just setting the definition for nuisance tree as whatever the appropriate staff member determines is a nuisance.
Thank you. I do have a couple of things. Yeah, thank you. So it sounds like you did a lot of research to see what all the other cities are doing, and it's pretty clear on the Emerald dashboard that this is a regional thing, and that's why all the cities have been talking with each other. If you go to Colorado Municipal League, and the mayors have talked about it, trying to figure out how to stem the tide of this all. So I'd really love to see the research you did already, like maybe in columns of what is Westminster doing, what are their major things, how does that compare to Littleton, how does that compare,
You don't want to read the 12 pages?
well, was it attached here?
No.
Oh,
it was
okay.
not. It was actually.
No,
the
I'm
results
thinking
our
of a
research.
simple like landscape graph with items that would be similar things like, okay, they banned or they treatments or whatever, and just kind of check off, yes, they do that, no, they don't do that, just to get a sort of sense. Because the worst thing that could happen is we undercode this or maybe overcoding it too, but I do think it's something that is gonna, it doesn't matter, it doesn't see any boundaries between Denver to Inglewood, and you know that. So how are we gonna do this together to make sure we're protecting everyone's trees?
And programs that have been developed,
Yeah.
not only by Boulder, but Denver and some other cities.
Okay, and Denver
too.
has too, okay, so maybe some examples of what that
Sure.
looks like. And I guess my last question is on 11.5. It's the very last one, which is state the Inglewood's commitment to tree canopy. This doesn't feel like a code to me. This feels like something in our strategic plan that should be highlighted, but maybe there are other examples of this and I'm just not thinking of them right off the top of my head. I agree with this, and I'd love to see us, make it front and center.
Well, one thing that we noticed in the other cities, they had a statement that clarified the importance of trees to the city and also established who in the city watches over our tree canopy, and that's not in our existing code.
And it's in other cities' codes like this?
It is.
Okay.
It
Yeah,
is.
that'd be helpful to
It's-
see some
it's
examples.
quite convincing,
Yeah.
and it also signifies to property owners.
Pull the mic up a bit.
It also signifies to property owners, that, what we're expecting them to do to
Right.
help save the tree canopy. And it's not a necessary, it is not code, but it is something that we could easily add. Right now, the way code reads is, it just goes right into code. There is no overarching statement or commitment for the
Right.
tree canopy.
Maybe this would be an introduction to that section or something.
And that's what
rather
the
than
other
an
cities have
actual
done.
11.5.1, but
We
maybe
actually put it at the back because we wanted to focus on the more concrete code changes,
Yeah.
and then but it would be the very first thing.
And the other thing, when I was I think it was probably 3 years ago, I was in a session on this with Colorado Municipal League, and there was lots and lots of media and communication going out. I know we've had some from our city, but I think residents who are told they're going to need to cut down a tree are going to be pretty confused by that if it's not, even when it looks like it's fine, but it really isn't. And so the more prep we can do now, year one, before it hits 3 or 5, I think they'll be aware and won't be as upset that, gosh, someone's judging my tree now, which can get very sticky, as you know, you work in code stuff. So I think the more we can do, hangers, door things, some of the,
Yeah, that's why we've pushed so hard on all the messaging for it, and because it's the whole expense thing,
Yeah.
because it's so much less expensive to treat a tree up front if you've got one than to deal with having to remove them.
yeah, and the timing of it, when do we do it, how far in advance versus, yeah. So I think this is great work. I'm supportive of seeing this go forward and continue working on it. Anybody else want to affirm that? That's what you're looking for tonight, right, is to keep it moving?
Well, and just one of the other questions, about our recommendations that we haven't completed yet in regard to potentially helping citizens. But one of those is just potentially coming up with encouraging, a collective deal, right, with arborists for treatment. There might be some way to structure that. Because we have a whole city of 22,000 plus trees on private property. I mean, obviously they don't necessarily all need to be saved, but the ones that people want to save, if we can get a deal together, and I don't know what that looks like to try to coordinate private business with city stuff, but that's one of our ideas that we're banging around.
And I also wanted to point out that we're talking about trees on private property. We're not talking about the trees on public property, which is already being proactively addressed by the Parks and Recs Commission. And they've done several things to also enhance awareness. For example, they put yellow tape around all the ash trees in the parks, and that there was a message on the tapes about emerald ash borer. I don't recall what it was right now. So they've been proactively
Right.
addressing that too, and we can borrow on some of the efforts that they've made.
Yeah. I think Councilmember Anderson's next.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm supportive of keeping this moving as well. I do think that, it looks like there's some tweaks that we need to make to our code, but largely I think this is a communications kind of an issue. We need to educate people and like you said, Carson, marshal the resources to help people know where to get an arborist. We have a big ash tree on our property, and we've been treating it since 2013. Now that seems like we've wasted all that money over these years, but man, I don't want to lose that thing. But I think a lot of people are not aware of that, and a lot of people do have these huge ash trees that make their yards really nice, and I just want to make sure the citizens know what they need to do to prevent losing those trees.
Councilmember Ward?
Thank you for all your work on this. This tree situation reminds me somewhat similar of the concrete utility that we have now, in that it costs a lot to replace sidewalk in front of your house, and it costs a lot to take a tree down from your house. So I wonder if there's an opportunity to do something similar citywide, wherein people can contribute to a utility or some sort of program over time, which would then allow them to deal with problem trees on their lot if the issue came up, using some sort of city or economic resource that the city might provide or subsidize somehow.
Are you talking about that insurance program that the city participated in for?
No, I'm talking about the concrete utility. If you check your water bill, you'll see that there's a concrete utility on the water bill, and that concrete utility is what grinds down and maintains the sidewalks in the public right-of-way right now. That's how we do that. There's an option for certain residents to opt out of that program based on certain circumstances, but I know that I certainly would have a hard time affording replacement of the sidewalk in front of my house, which is technically my responsibility, but because I pay into the concrete utility, I don't have to worry about maintaining it. I just pay that every month.
Thank you. Member Russell?
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to weigh in. I'm not in favor of the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee moving forward with putting that type of program where the government collects a boatload of money. I know that things can be difficult. We have a lot of big trees in our yard, and we're looking at a pretty hefty trimming bill. I understand that, but I think there are other ways that we can handle that, especially for people that cannot afford it. I mean, and what I'm thinking about is the 30% of the individuals in the city that are living on fixed income. But to make the entire city move into a program like that, I'm not in favor of that.
But you're fine
Thank
with
you.
the rest of it?
Yes,
moving-
I am
Having them
fine.
keep moving forward?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Sierra?
Yeah, I'm in favor of the city attorney looking into this.
Great, thank you. I think we have enough to have you keep moving ahead and looking for ways to make it work for everyone around. I do want to make one comment about concrete. It's quite different. Everybody's, for the most part, got concrete, but not everybody has ash trees. So paying into something that you don't have, and it would be a little bit of a problem. But we did do that water and sewer line insurance, which many people
Yeah, because
are
that was
still-
optional. You could
Yes,
choose
it
to
sure was.
participate in it, and
people
it
are
was a
very thankful to
collective
have it that
benefit
do-
thing. so.
have had it done, but it's not something that everybody agreed was a good thing.
And,
Yeah.
before we learned about the EAB issue, we had already been talking about the problem of diseased and dying trees in private property when we know the homeowner cannot afford to replace it. That was an issue we had identified, and we had never resolved it. So in a way, we might be able to address that at the same time. And it's not just an ash borer, but anybody that cannot afford.
Many of us remember elms being the last tree that was wiped out. So thank you very much for the work you've done on this, and we'll hopefully see it back in the next several weeks or months. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Olson. Thank you, city council members. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your coming. Our agenda item 5 is Innovative Housing Strategy Planning Grant. Our Director of Community Development, Brad Power, Planning Manager Wade Burkholder, and Senior Planner Brooke Bell are present to discuss and receive direction on an application for a DOLA, which you know what that is. It's Department of Local Affairs Innovative Housing Strategy Grant. Are all of you here that I just mentioned, or is it just
The two of us
the
will
two of
cover
you?
it. And I will introduce it. Good evening, Mayor Olson, members of council. The issue of housing affordability and attainability has obviously emerged as a pretty key issue across the state, and especially within the Front Range, and obviously within this community as well. And we've heard that from a couple of occasions in the recent past. First was when we did our community outreach relative to getting people's ideas relative to how the current development standards and building codes address all types of development-related issues in the community. We heard the issue about affordable housing at that point. You have all raised, or some of you have raised the issue relative to affordable housing development as it relates to some of the planned unit development proposals that you've seen recently. So it's obviously something that is continuing to grow in importance for people in terms of an issue for where to be housed and how to be housed and what types of housing that communities like ours could foster in the future. And it was quite fortuitous that there was a state law passed in the last legislative session that was enacted in, I think, in June or July, that created a new housing grant program for communities to look at strategic issues and new policy development around affordable and attainable housing. And so we were made aware of that grant opportunity, and we thought it was a really interesting timing event because, as you know, we have now formally embarked on the process to update our entire development code. That project is known as Code Next. And so Wade will talk a little bit in a moment about a proposal that we want to make for you tonight and get your direction on relative to incorporating this grant opportunity that we have with the Department of Local Affairs into that Code Next project so that we can have a community discussion and a discussion with you in the near future relative to new housing opportunities around affordability that we could build into our codes and policies in the future. So with that, I'll turn it over to Wade Burkholder, our planning manager, to make the presentation.
Thank you, Brad. Good evening, Mayor Olson and members of council. Tonight we want to use our time to discuss this opportunity as well as receive your direction on submitting this grant application. We are fortunate enough to have this opportunity before us in conjunction with Code Next, and as Brad mentioned, in June of this year, This new legislation was signed into law, which provides 3 different state assistance programs to local governments that promote the development of innovative affordable housing strategies. And if, depending on the conversation this evening, we receive favorable feedback, we are ready to proceed with a resolution to authorize this application going to the state, and that would be before you on October 4th. So we are ready to take that official step and actually submit the grant here in the next week after that. So in and around about October 11th, we would be looking to submit the grant. The 3 pieces of legislation, or the 3 programs that were created, it includes a housing development incentives grant, an innovative housing planning grant, as well as a housing toolkit program. And I just want to mention that the only open fund is for the Innovative Housing Planning Grant Program at this time. And what we are planning for in this grant application is twofold. The first part of the grant would be utilized to prepare a community-wide housing needs assessment. And what we would be looking at in the housing needs assessment is the evaluation of the specific demographic data in Inglewood, current economic characteristics and trends, as well as the evaluation of the current housing inventory in the city. The needs assessment would look at certain policies and incentives that Inglewood may consider implementing to stimulate the development of affordable housing. We will also look at the evaluation of vacant and or underutilized opportunity sites within the city, looking at things that may be hindering or blocking the creation of affordable housing, such as infrastructure, utilities, things of that nature. One of the items planned for the needs assessment is also to conduct a financial feasibility study, which not only will determine the types of housing units that are needed in the city, but it will also conduct a gap analysis on the target income markets. So which income level are we most lacking here in Inglewood? Is it the very low income? Is it the low income, moderate income? So it will look at all of those ranges of incomes, but it will pinpoint, maybe if there's a need for affordable housing serving that very low income group. It will also look at the characteristics, such as the aging population, or there'll be conversations about how we can serve homeless populations within the community with some of these grants or some of these strategies. Secondly, or next, the needs assessment will provide what's called a nexus study, and that will actually quantify the demand for affordable housing units. So how many units will we need to target, or will Inglewood need to have come into its housing stock in order to meet the demand of those income groups? So it looks at quantifying those numbers. It also looks at those numbers with regard to the new commercial and or market rate housing developments that are occurring. So we're getting X number of market rate housing, and how does that relate to the affordable units that we're maybe missing out on? So it'll quantify those numbers. The second part of the grant is to take a look at 14 strategies that this legislation put forth for local communities to consider, and they're strategies that we may consider to encourage affordable housing development. I'm referring to attachment 1 in your packet, and it's this list of 14 strategies that are broken out into A, B, and C. And these are, as I mentioned, established by the state legislation. So the grant program requires that we put forth a minimum of 3 of these strategies in order to implement. And as Brad mentioned, this is a great time to do that, as we're already looking at Code Next, which is the update of the development code in the city. So in box A, there are 3 of the 14 strategies that Inglewood already enables. Classification of a proposed affordable housing development as a use by right when it meets the building density and design standards of a given zone. And Inglewood codes allow planned unit developments to integrate affordable housing units. And Inglewood code also allows the development of small square footage residential unit sizes. Now, B and C are what we need to talk about in more detail tonight with you all. These are interchangeable, so we can move these around. Items in box B can move to C, and C can move to B.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Wade. Are we supposed to be seeing this on the screen right now?
I do not have a
Okay,
PowerPoint
sorry.
presentation, no.
No. Would you prefer that that be muted? Is that, doesn't matter, there isn't a PowerPoint in this one.
Sure, thank you. So in box B, those are the strategies that we are recommending to be included for implementation through this grant program. And that is authorizing accessory dwelling units as a use by right on parcels in single-family zone districts. And if you recall, we currently permit accessory dwelling units in the R1C single-family zone district already. We also permit them in R2A and R2B, which is the single-family, multifamily mix. So what this strategy would be looking at is expanding ADUs into the R1A and R1B zone districts, as well as potentially looking at new regulation to allow attached accessory dwelling units. Right now, they have to be detached units. So this is one strategy we think is fairly far along in the discussion with the community, and we might have an opportunity here to continue the discussion and possibly expand this strategy to permit and develop some more affordable units within the community. The second is the establishment of a density bonus program to increase the construction of units that meet critical housing needs in the community. So what a density bonus provides is an increase in the allowed dwelling units per acre based on the overall zone district. So you're expanding the number of units allowed per acre. Typically by 10 to 20% is what other communities allow in terms of a bonus. But those 10 to 20% units created would have to be designated as affordable. This oftentimes is referred to as an inclusionary housing ordinance, where this would be another strategy to spur or create the development of more affordable units. The third is to lessen the minimum parking requirements for new affordable housing developments. We've all heard that parking creation is the most expensive, one of the most expensive portions of new developments, and it often hinders the affordability of the units in the end. And so we would propose to continue in the discussion and possibly create new code around parking requirements if your units are affordable. Items 4 and 5. 4 is the use of vacant publicly owned real property within the local government for the development of affordable housing. And the 5th is the creation of an expedited development review process for acquiring or repurposing underutilized commercial property that can be rezoned to include affordable housing units, including the preservation of existing affordable housing units. And as we met with Lindsay at the Housing Authority, these were two of her most interested items because they are often more meaningful in the end upon a successful strategy for the community. Inglewood has numerous existing structures that are affordable by definition in the community, and the preservation of those structures and units is something we need to remember and to develop a strategy around in order to keep them viable for the future generations. And then we've also seen and spoken with some people regarding some commercial property that they were looking to develop as multifamily. Again, the zoning was a hindrance to that in regard to residential use was not permitted within that zone district. So they were looking at a lengthy PUD process to go through and so forth. So the goal of these strategies is to break down some of the barriers in front of affordable housing development. So we need to create these strategies as well as determine which sectors of the market are needing the most assistance, and so we can target our programs to those individuals. As I mentioned, we need to put 3 strategies forth in this grant application. There's 5 here. So we can remove 2 if we don't feel that we're ready to tackle that one. I want to stress that the requirement of the grant is that these actually become implemented via code in our Unified Development Code. So any number of these, all 14 or all 11, can be looked at as part of the Code Next process, but we're trying to be strategic in which ones we put forth in the grant, because those are the ones that will be expected to be implemented. So those are the 5 that we have put forward. Again, after consulting with Lindsay at the Housing Authority as well as the Code Next Steering Committee, we have had discussions over these particular strategies and feel these are the ones we are most comfortable putting forth at this time. The city or city staff is putting together a grant application not to exceed $160,000, of which the bulk of that would be covered under the housing needs assessment. And development of these strategies, whichever we choose, grant funding will be targeted for an inclusive and comprehensive public outreach program around the topic of affordable housing. Code Next did not contemplate a housing needs assessment as the overall one of the outcomes of that process. So this grant will certainly help us expand the conversation and expand the overall strategies that the city has moving forward in terms of affordable housing development. So it is recommended that the city provide an overmatch to this grant. 25% match is required. DOLA anticipates this to be a very competitive grant process with quite a few communities going in for the funding as well. So what we have for a proposal for you all to consider also is a 50-50 match to that $160,000 total. The city match of $80,000 would be taken from Fund 46, the Housing Enterprise Fund, which currently has a balance of a little over $1 million. So that match would be available to us to make our application more competitive. That said, I think we, as I mentioned, would like to hear your thoughts and receive your direction on moving forward with submitting this grant, but also if we can hear what your thoughts are on the recommended strategies to pursue as part of this grant as well. So I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm waiting to see some lights go on, but I'm so glad to see this come before us. When I heard about it this summer, I was hoping maybe we could do this. Councilmember Anderson, you're first.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director Power, Mr. Burkholder. I really like this. It looks like the options you've selected are kind of the lower bar ones. My question is if you don't meet one of those criteria in your box B, is there some penalty associated with that?
The penalty with that is there is a clawback provision in the grant. So if DOLA sees you are not making progress, they can ask you to return some of the funding. Now, they will be flexible. Having said that, if you're in the middle of the process and you don't find a lot of support for 4, you might be able to switch it out with one of the other strategies in box C. So that's why we're looking at some of these. We feel we are there on some of them, very closely there, or it's something we can develop a strategy around. Maybe a little more easier. I don't like using saying that, but maybe than some of the other ones that would require a little more in-depth.
Yeah, I was initially going to say number 4 under box C is one I would like to put into box B, but having heard you explain kind of the criteria for the grant, I don't know that I would move anything around. I think the ones in box B seem pretty doable overall. So
Right.
I think you've done a good job of kind of analyzing the options and putting them in there.
Thank you. And as I mentioned too, that we can still consider number 4 as a strategy as part of the whole overall Code Next.
Yeah, I guess
Wouldn't be
that's what I
tied.
would add is definitely not, like, I don't want to take anything off the table as far as Code Next at this
Right.
point, but
Right,
seeing
sure.
those options in there. Yep. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Powers and Mr. Burkholder. Has staff ever given any thought to how dense do we want Inglewood to be at the end of the day?
I think that's one of the reasons why we're trying to focus on our development code after an absence of almost 20 years of change. And one of the things that we want to do with Code Next is answer that question with the community and ultimately with you. So the question about how much is enough and where is something that we take our cue from you on. But what we're trying to do, what we're attempting to do with the Code Next work and this work is to answer that question for the community for its next generation of development. So I don't have a number answer for you, but at the end of the day, we will definitely take our cue in terms of the direction from the City Council on that, based on the inputs that we can provide and the community input that we're planning through the Code Next project and these grant endeavors as well.
I appreciate that. I guess I have one concern. If there is penalties for moving forward with some of these things, and then at the end of the day, we decide that we don't want as much density as these things are going to create, then we're going to end up having to pay all of the money back. Is that correct, or am I thinking wrong?
Well, and that's why we want to make sure that there's a minimum of 3. So we want to make sure the 3 that we put forth we're somewhat confident that we can make progress in. So if if there is one of here listed, then we should probably not put that forth and just lump it into the category of, we'll look at that under code next, but not tie it specifically to the grant. But you know, I think it would need to be and I don't know this for sure, but a very serious issue before DOLA would require payback. I think it'll be incumbent on us to really document the conversations we're having and document the public outreach we're having, and just put forth our case if it would come to that. But it is certainly something we've talked about and are weary of and aware of, that we want to make sure we have something here that we can make progress towards implementing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I think it was Member Cuesta, you're next, and then Mayor Protem.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, staff members. I just want to make sure I understand just the process correctly. And I want to start with the amount of money we're seeking. We're seeking $160,000, but we would match 80.
We would match 80,000 of that. To make our grant more competitive, our application more competitive, we would offer an overmatch, whereas only 25% local match is required, we would offer 50.
So if under that scenario, and if awarded the grant, we're getting 80K out of this?
Correct.
Secondly, so we have A, B, and C. We have the various boxes. Now, you mentioned that we only need 5. Does that mean we could pick any 5 out of any, or any 5 combined out of those 3 boxes? Those 5 could then be submitted for our grant.
We would need just a minimum of 3. We've put
Thank
forth
you.
the recommended 5. Inglewood code already meets box A, so we already do that. So out of boxes B and C, we would need a total of 3 strategies to put forth in the grant. Staff is simply proposing the 5 in box B as our recommended 5 out of the remaining.
And if I may, just so I'm understanding correctly, if we only need 3, A has 3 that are existing, could we just submit A? Now, I know you're shooting for more than 3, but wouldn't A just get us where we needed to be to meet the minimum qualifications for the grant application?
The strategies in box A, our city codes already meet those. So we already do, our code does permit planned unit developments with affordable housing units in them. So we've already met those 3 criteria.
Sure.
So we're looking for 3 additional.
Is the state requiring that we take some new action in order to meet any, to be considered for this grant?
Yes.
Okay, so then that does leave me to B and C. Thank you for outlining what takes place in A.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, let's go with B1, authorizing accessory dwelling units as a use by right on parcels in single-family zoning districts. That is not currently allowed in R1A and R1B, correct?
Correct.
So if we submit this grant, we're making a change to what is allowed per our codes. Just for this grant application alone, we're going to have to change our neighborhood codes.
The outcome of the work that we do in the grant would result in a new code in the Unified Development Code. So we don't have to change our code right now. We're saying these are the strategies we want to look at to reach the end goal of a changed code.
So we could be awarded this grant, let's say, if we committed to B, let's say we went with the B 1 through 5 in box B there. We are awarded the grant. We are then making a commitment that when the UDC change comes along, we will make changes accordingly. If we were not to, then we potentially have to give 80K back.
If I
Tell
can
me if
follow
I've
up on that.
misunderstood that.
I think that's a possibility, but one of the things that is attractive about this grant, irrespective of the code outcome, is it allows us to do the analysis that we didn't have built in before. It allows us to have a much more in-depth community conversation around these issues. And relative to the code amendments, what I said before still holds. And what I think Wade said is correct. What we'll do is when we're ready to go forward with a public draft of our new development code, which may have some of these elements in it. That's what we'll share with the state in terms of trying to meet the criteria and have the discussion about this clawback or not. I'm hopeful that we won't have a clawback provision and that there won't be anything that's specifically related to these sentences that are here, because I think if we meet the spirit of some of these policy initiatives, then we could probably have a conversation with DOLA around we've met them in another way. The big attraction for this is that it gives us $80,000 of money that we otherwise wouldn't have relative to doing this analysis and having the community conversation around housing affordability and attainability as it relates to how we develop that into our codes, irrespective of the breadth of it.
When is this application due by?
They are doing monthly submittals, so there was a submittal already passed in September. So the next submittal date is October 25th, I believe.
And the reason I ask that is we're making a commitment to code changes for something that's due October 25th, but the UDC isn't coming before council. I mean, my understanding is that was going to be a many, many months long process, if not into 23, definitely into 22, but if not even into 23.
Right, correct. So the work will be done in side-by-side code next, so these will be concurrent processes. So what we will start out with is the housing needs assessment, which will likely give us some data and guidance as to how we best implement any code change that we have or end up with. So the grant cycle, the monies, if awarded here, would not have to be spent until 2024. Our anticipated project for Code Next and this still remains the end of 2022. So we do have some time to look at this, but we anticipate the housing needs assessment really informing our Code Next rewrite or update, and how we best can use that data to implement any strategies that we put forward.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I know I asked probably more questions than I was afforded, so
That's
I appreciate
all
it,
right.
Mayor. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Member Cuesta, because you started taking off some of the questions I had. But I'm definitely happy to see this come forward for us. As Member Russell stated, there are quite a few families here in Inglewood that are on fixed incomes, and trying to find anything for someone that's trying to move into the city is being a lot more cost prohibitive, so I'm happy to see this come in front. I guess my question is, and I'm sure that this will be something that we discuss, but in terms of the accessory dwelling units, the R1A, R1B, were those properties that don't happen to have an alley at all? I think that was possibly the reason why we excluded those.
You're correct, and part of the ADU conversation would be whether or not to permit
Right.
Attached ADUs and not limited to detached, which they access off the alley. So that's all would be part of that.
So that's very understandable why we have that as B1. B5, that sounds very similar to what we, as a council, passed last month for the zoning of the city center, right, where we have a review, an expedited review process. Am I reading that correctly then? So this would be for the entire city for anybody that's looking to add affordable housing?
That's correct, yep.
Okay. I'm fine having, or I don't want to take anything off the table, as Member Anderson stated. I'm happy to look at all of these. There's some here that I'm just not as comfortable with, but definitely want to do additional research to see which of those make sense for our city. So thank you for the work.
Thank you. Member Anderson, your light is still on. Is that from earlier, or did you have?
No,
something?
I had one
Okay,
more
great. Go on.
comment. This was just a piece of information I wanted to throw out for council because I saw the results of the 2020 census came back, and I was kind of surprised to see that Inglewood's population in 2020 was actually lower than it was in 1970. So I don't know if the density problem is, it's more of a perception than a reality. Of course, different areas of the city are more dense and some are less dense, but I think that's what to be expected with a changing community over time. That was the only thing I wanted to add in there. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you. When was the last time an affordable housing development was built in Inglewood?
Yeah, there've been a couple recently. The first one was the Broadway Lofts that's on Broadway. That opened, I believe, about 3 years ago. And then the second one is the apartments up at Ironworks Village that also opened probably about 4 years ago now.
Do you know how many units of those were dedicated to affordable housing?
Both of them are each 100% affordable.
Do you know how many units that is total between the two of them, even a ballpark?
I believe don't hold me, but I
Sure.
believe the Broadway Lofts is approximately 110 units. And I think the ones up north by Ironworks are around 70 or 80.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Point of
So-
information.
Just go ahead.
Is Traditions an affordable housing unit building?
Is that the one owned by the Housing Authority?
No.
No?
No,
it's,
but there are some Section 8 housing. It's the Masonic Lodge property.
next to the Safeway. Just-
I'm not aware of the combination
it
of units
is.
in that one. I
Well, they're-
apologize.
Yeah, I think for seniors, and it's limited as to who can get in, but yeah, I think there's, I
Okay.
don't know what, this was a council request a while back to get the breakdown, so maybe we can search for that and bring it up again as the data of our city and housing and how many, would that help at all?
Yes, I mean, so even for the sake of this conversation, it sounds like we got 110 at the Broadway Lofts, call it 70 or 80 at Ironworks. So we get to about a couple hundred, give or take, over the past 3 years, 4 years that we've added to the city. And you may or may not know, how many ADU applications have we had since we opened up that program? I assume we can count them on our hands, I would imagine.
Applications, we've had 2. We have done probably around 20 development review team reviews, but they've not made it to an application.
Very good, thank you. Are we still in questions, Mayor?
It's study session. Yes, questions, comments, whatever you want, it's fine. Did you have another one? Go ahead. 'Cause nobody else has their light on, I don't think, so.
And so what guidance are you seeking tonight? Is council just to provide guidance on which of these items we'd like to see included in the application?
Yes, we're looking for your discussion and guidance, and we would be ready to bring forth a resolution actually authorizing the application submittal on October 4th. So if I guess the end result would be consensus around the 5 in box B, that would be helpful. Or if we want to remove 1 or 2 of those, we need a minimum of 3 to be in box B at the end of the night.
And tell me, 3 is the recommendations of staff. C are just other potential options?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, may I, Mayor?
Go ahead.
I would say for me, the non-starter is B1. And that is just allowing ADUs by right across all single-family zoning districts. I don't want to introduce that into R1 A, nor R2A, and pardon me, as I'm likely getting these wrong. I also don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. We've got a couple applications over the past couple years, and so I don't even think that that's going to really solve any of Inglewood's housing problems, and I don't want to change such a critical part of what I believe to be the residential zoning code, just to check a box on this application. So B1 would be probably the non-starter for me. The other ones I can get behind. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Others? Let me ask you a question about B1, because I'm sure we have completely different views on that one. Would putting the first 5 forward bind us to doing number 1? What I would probably surmise is that in the research of the grant that we'd be getting paid, that we'll find out that number 1 probably won't change affordable housing very much, so we may end up focusing on 2, 3, and 4, say. And so would they claw back because we didn't do any more beyond what we already have for ADUs? Very few cities have ADUs outside of Denver anyway, so.
Right. We'd have to make our case to show that we've actually discussed it and made advancements in that. I don't know how strict they would be if we don't end up with a final code that expands it.
Okay.
But I would recommend that if there's hesitation, that we don't put it forth as part of the grant. We just put that in the code next box and discuss it and not tie it to the grant.
All right. I'm actually in favor of number one being in there. But if there's another one, what you're saying is under C, we could pull some of those out instead and replace it? Is that?
Yes.
To get up to 5? Okay.
Oh,
And it might be nice to hear which was on your next list if one of these.
And again, we only need 3.
Yeah,
So
I
if
know, but I
there's-
like your idea of, priming the pump a bit.
Right.
I think the timing of this is incredible. And as long as we have enough to fall back on and say we can't necessarily do that one, but these, and show due diligence to show that we actually are making a bigger impact by the other ones, I can't imagine that they'll claw back. They'll say, well, obvious, it's not, we have a track record. We only have 2 applicants. And that's not going to change much for affordability for 2 families, and we don't even know. So anyway, Councilmember Anderson.
I would suppose that having more in box B is a more desirable application for Dole. They don't want to see cities that are trying to do the bare minimum for what they're asking. So it might make our application more competitive in that sense. Would that be fair?
It could, but it's going to come back to the city council and the comfort level.
Sure.
Here. So
To me, number one, as far as code change, that's one of my personal top priorities. I know we have different views on council. One of my top priorities as a council member is to make those ADUs, make our ADU law more functional. And I think by allowing attached or even basement ADUs throughout all zone districts would make it much more desirable to build those. So I think I would definitely like to see number one stay in there.
And if I may give just a little bit of background on the ADUs, what we see most often is that with the detached ADUs, a lot of people would like to put them above their existing garage. And their existing garages, their foundations aren't built to support the weight of a second story. So they're looking at just having to scrape the garage and build all brand new. And it very quickly escalates the cost to where, putting in the affordable or the accessory dwelling unit just isn't affordable or worth it anymore. So that's part of what's going on with the current ordinance, and why I think, looking at an accessory dwelling unit that's attached or part of an existing structure could help raise those numbers a little bit. So that's just a little bit of what's going on there as well.
Thank you, Mayor.
Others? Councilmember, or Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would be in favor of all of B to be as part of the application as well. I differ with Member Cuesta in terms of the ADUs. Actually, I believe I stayed in a attached ADU in Fruta. And I actually believe that may be part of the reason why we don't have as many applications as for ADUs in the city, is the fact that we don't allow them as STR. So I think that may have taken away people's desire to also build them. But I'm with Member Anderson in the sense that I see no issues with adding additional ADUs or additional language for ADUs in the future. But yeah, I definitely want to pursue all 5 of those.
Thank you. Member Ward, do you want to weigh in? Okay, so you've got 3 at least saying bring it back,
Okay.
and we can vote how we want.
Is 3 enough? We have
We're not
6 here.
It's not a vote. I think it's an average consensus, isn't it?
Well, we've got 3. That's 50.
Yeah.
That's half.
I'm supportive of the proposed plan, bringing it forward. So
Okay, great.
if I need to
Thanks.
be the swing vote, I will.
I actually think we've brought things forward when we have 3, but it's fine. Because you can vote. This isn't a voting night, it's getting a sense. But I don't know, City Attorney, for that, because we've had a lot of 6 people in the last few weeks. When we're trying to build consensus, does it have to be a majority? It feels like we're voting then.
Because this is a study session, I don't think a vote is required, and in fact, you don't take votes at study session. I think this is just a consensus as to whether you would like staff to do the additional work and bring it forward. So I would feel comfortable doing that on a 3-3 vote, because the actual, or not vote, just a 3-3 consensus, because the actual vote will occur when the matter is brought forward.
Great, thank you. Bring it back. We'll see
Okay.
what happens.
Thank you
Thanks
very
for
much.
the due diligence on this. I know it was a quick turnaround.
Thank you for your time tonight.
All right, next is our monthly finance update. informational tonight with Director of Finance Jackie Loh, here to present our monthly financial report. Welcome.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to review the 2021 August financial report with you tonight. We're going to review the general fund revenues. Through August 2021, the city's general fund receipts total $39.8 million that are 75.9% of budgeted revenue. Total revenue year-to-date is tracking 11.7% higher than the same time last year. The revenue highlights are as below. The sales use tax remittance total $22.8 million and are 66.1% of fiscal budgeted revenue. The sales use tax received is $1.7 million higher than the same time last year. Of the variance, $300,000 is due to a closed liability account. And additionally, the sales use tax audits and volunteers disclosure collections amount to $575,000, which is not in the amended budget. Marijuana sales tax accounts for $1.3 million of the total sales use tax revenue year to date. Is $94,000 higher than the same time last year. One of the large retailer paid off the outstanding balance in August, which is ahead of the payment plan schedule, as the sales of the company was finalized in August and the state signed off the license transfer. License permits revenue totals $1.5 million and is 125% of the budgeted revenue, largely due to 2 large development plan review fees. And other minor variances, please review my narrative. I want to point out that the ARPA grant funding of $1.5 million has been recorded using the lost revenue provision of the grant. The funds will be used for Little Dry Creek, rail trail, and historical preservation projects. We just received the information from the Government Finance Officers Association. Based on the new res law revenue calculation, we are able to utilize the lost revenue provision to replenish the revenue by $5 million, not a $3 million as previously stated. Once the council approves the ARPA spending plan, we're going to reclassify the ARPA funding accordingly. This is sales use tax revenues collected from the top 10 business sources. And this is a sales use tax revenue collected in the past 3 years. And you can see the year-to-date sales use tax revenues collected have been higher than the pre-COVID since March 2021. This slide shows the cumulative change in sales use tax collected in the 5 past years. This number includes not only the tax sales use and sales tax increase, and also reflect the audit collection efforts in the past 5 years. Regarding the total expenditures, expenditures year to date are $35.6 million, or 60.8% of fiscal year budget. The total expenditures year to date are $2.2 million higher than those of 2020. The primary factors are due to the payment timing. We're paying several vendors earlier than past, also one-time transactions. Slide shows the total general fund transfer in and transfer out. The net transfer out amount is 10.7 million through the budget supplemental 124. This is general fund balance composition. At the end of the year, you can see we have an operating surplus in the amount of 4.1 million. If we consider the transfer in and transfer out, that gives us a total year-to-date deficit of 6.6 million. This is just sales use tax collection by areas. We'll also include the areas in the appendix. This concludes my presentation tonight. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Any questions, council? Just keep the revenue up.
Yeah.
Oh, Councilmember Russell does have one.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the report, Director Loh. In the council communication, it says, after including the changes in the budget supplementals number 1, 2, 3, and 4, the amended budget operating deficit is 6.172 million, 1.4 for COP debt payment, and 2.8 million for EAF outstanding loan included. What is the EAF outstanding loan?
You need to turn it on again. Thank you.
Yeah, we're planning to pay off all the outstanding loan from EAF. That's also part of the COP, 2.8 million. We're paying down the COP in the amount of 1.4 million every year. 1.4 million will be, I think, was due in June this year. Then we're planning to pay off the debt by the end of this year.
So the 2.8 million would be the remaining COP payments that we would pay in future years?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem C.R.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm just making a comment. Actually, if you want to go back to the general fund expenditures chart, no big deal, but the way that I'm reading that very last column, 2021 versus 2020, I don't understand why it's in parentheses. It's actually like a 2.217 million difference, but it has it as a less than. I guess I would just change it
Back.
from the other way. Yeah, so it just, I kept looking at it, I was like, that doesn't look right, so.
Okay, I changed this back. The reason is whenever I see the number in parentheses, that's unfavorable variance. If it's a positive, it's favorable. We definitely can change this back, but I feel that might be easier for your understanding. Do you want us to change this back?
It's not that big of a deal because I understand that we have,
Every-
I understand what the numbers are in 2021, so
Yeah,
it's no
okay.
big deal on mine.
I always read parentheses as deficit or negative.
Negative, yeah. Unfavorable, yeah.
And so which
Unfavorable
one is
variances.
it that it doesn't have? Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm not
Yeah,
going to
which
take any more
means
time.
we spent more
It's up later.
than the same time last year, then it's unfavorable.
All
Okay.
right. Great, thank you. Thank you for your
Okay, thank you.
presentation. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to take a break. We took a little longer on the first agenda item today because our citizens went a little over with their great presentation, but I think it was well worth the extra time. So let's take a break and come back here at about, let's come back at 7:35. 7:35, so 9 minutes, I guess. Trying to get us back on. Gosh, we were back 1 minute before. Since we're all seated, we might as well begin. The next is our ARPA fund discussion, and City Manager Lewis is actually going to kick us off along with Assistant City Manager Tim Dodd and Director of Finance Jackie Loh are all present here to discuss the list of projects and get us moving on this. So thank you, and hope you're doing well there, Manager Lewis, but you want to go ahead and start us off, that's great.
Thank you, Mayor. I am feeling a little bit better, and apologies that I can't be there in person. I just want to give a little bit of background before we kick into the start into the PowerPoint. As you know, on March 11th, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan Act. There's some dates that are pretty important to understand as we move through this, because we just want to really emphasize that this is not a final list, because we really don't have final rules. But in May 10th, the U.S. Treasury provided an interim final rule, then opened public comment shortly thereafter for folks, counties, cities, states to really weigh in, as well as residents, to weigh in on the spending plan, the proposed spending categories, et cetera. And the deadline for that was July 16th. And so we're really expecting that final rule anytime within the next month or two, hopefully sooner or later, so that we can move on. But there are a number of categories that we've talked to you about that were specifically listed in the Act: water, sewer, stormwater, homelessness prevention and assistance, and then a variety of COVID-related items such as helping businesses recover, assisting affected families and individuals, premium pay for essential workers, prevention and vaccines, and then also just general replacement of lost government revenue of the entity. And Tim, I don't want to steal Tim's thunder on the community engagement, but I read those in the order of which they actually were ranked by our own residents in our community engagement, which we're pretty proud of that process. So to remind you, Inglewood got $8.8 million. Half of our allocation has already been received. And so that is in the bank, if you will. What Director Loh mentioned is really important in terms of the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, has come out with a revised formula for calculating lost revenue. The reason why that's so important, that we're moving from what we thought was $3.2 million in lost revenue to $5 million in lost revenue, is because it means that $5 million of our 8.8 is going to be far less restricted. Now, we think everything that we're proposing meets the guidelines, but we're not sure yet how projects that are not categorized under that lost revenue are going to have to be accounted for. For instance, if we did a project on sidewalks, are we going to have to federalize all of those projects, meaning we're going to have to pay Davis-Bacon wages? Are we going to have to do reporting, to the federal government on project by project? And so it's really important that we think we can get a little more of that money, the 8.8, into the category of lost revenue. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Tim to walk you through our community engagement process.
Thank you, Sean. So I just wanted to point out, Mayor and members of council, that in your packet, the full community engagement report is pages 12 to 18. So thanks to our communications department, we utilized a platform called Bang the Table, which is a public engagement platform. We had 720 total visitors. I believe those are unique visits to the website. We had 299 engaged visitors. Basically, that could mean one of two things. It meant either that someone voted, so they expressed their opinion on what their priorities were, and or they identified and wrote a specific comment. So we did have 21 unique comments. And I believe in your council communication on the last page of it, there's basically a summation of what the flavor of those comments, and the full text of those comments is, I believe, again, between pages 12 and 18. I think they're on pages 14, I think page 14 is where they start. So this is basically the ranking in order of priority that was expressed. Water really was the number one priority. I believe it was 2.7, so out of a 1 to 10 scale, it ranked the highest. The next, so essentially, as you see here, most of the infrastructure-related projects did rank relatively high. There's a little bit of a drop off between water and sewer. Sewer, stormwater, and streets are pretty clustered in terms of, I think they were all right around 5 or so in a 1 to 10 scale. And then we have sidewalks and trails. Bike lanes were a bit lower, and kind of as you see here, in the middle were most of the COVID-related projects, with the replacement of revenue being the last one there. And I'll turn it back to Sean to go over the modifications that were made to the original list.
Thanks, Tim. So based on the feedback that we got from the public, as well as some additional feedback that we received from council in interim discussions we've had both at council meetings, as well as in my one-on-one meetings with each of you, we have made a number of changes. Although I wouldn't call them substantial. The main item that came in as a pretty large ticket item a little bit late in the game was an organization called Cross Purpose. They are locating in Inglewood, and Tim will talk a little bit more about them, but they do poverty eradication programs, career guidance, career training, pretty successful program that's operated in Denver for many years. They are opening a facility in Inglewood now. They came in with an original request of $1 million. And after talking to them about the fact that we really want to focus this funding on capital expenditures as opposed to staffing or programs, services, that sort of thing, we did inform them that we were going to propose a reduced dollar amount, but we did have to shift some things around even to do that. For instance, you may remember that in the original list for ARPA, we proposed some grant funding for matching grants. We think that we've actually got that funding covered in our contingency for 2022, insofar as because it was a better budget year, we were able to put a little bit more in contingency. We think that can be covered there. We also originally talked to you about some job training, some maybe career fairs and that sort of thing for economic development focus. The business has really told us we don't need that. We need employees, and the job fairs haven't been particularly helpful. So we are proposing, actually economic development, community development is proposing a bonus program for Inglewood employers that they can help recruit workers because they are all telling us through the chamber, directly to the city, that their biggest need is employees and just finding them, getting them hired and keeping them. So we think that that would be a good program. We also added, based on feedback that we got from Mayor Pro Tem C.R.S, as well as Member Anderson with regard to 15-minute city and a bike boulevard. We have added an additional $150,000 in bike ped improvements. That's on top of the funding that we already had for rail trails that was mentioned previously in your financial report from Director Loh. We also have decreased the incentive program. You may remember this is really the only one that staff asked for you to weigh in on quite early in the process. That's because obviously this one was time sensitive. And so there were 4 council members who expressed support for this. We know that was not unanimous, but we have had about 100 people that have taken advantage of this with a $100 gift card, and were incentivized to get the vaccine. So we spent $10,000. We think we can reduce the total dollar amount for what we had originally set aside at $50,000 to $30,000. And then also, again, to some degree, provide some equity between Bridge House and Cross Purpose. We did reduce their funding that was originally proposed by a bit, but obviously still there, as you can see, a large amount. And so next slide is just how this fund really ties to the strategic plan. Obviously, we're really trying to focus our spending on the strategic plan. And of course, our capital improvement program is also a reflection of our strategic plan. So the categories that we're really hitting in this are infrastructure, transportation, sustainability, local economy, safety, particularly in the area of homelessness, as well as COVID-19 recovery. And so we'll just quickly walk you through the categories of spending and what is being proposed to spend. And I'm going to make my screen bigger here. So in the infrastructure category, those water, wastewater, stormwater priorities that were really, I'm very impressed with our our electorate who really understands the value of infrastructure. This was their top ranked item. And we're allocating of our 8.8, 4.2 million to those different utilities. And I would also want to emphasize that does not mean that we can reduce or kind of slow the brakes on the things that we need to do in terms of rate increases to continue on the financial trajectory that we're on now. It just means that we'll be able to augment and do some things faster because we have this additional funding that we could put towards that. In sustainability, we're proposing an energy efficiency sustainability pilot project. This is something that's mentioned in your strategic plan, and we're proposing about 200,000 there. In local economy, the business staff recruitment bonus program that I mentioned, we're proposing that at about 50,000. And again, that came from the chamber as well as the community development department. Moving down to COVID-19 programming as listed as a category, that vaccination program and navigation program, we're talking about 30,000. You may remember that originally came as an idea that, let's do vouchers to get residents to shop locally. We really tried to combine that with some things that we heard from other council members about we really need to be promoting and increasing vaccination rates. On the transportation category, street improvements, we're proposing $1 million there. You may remember that our street assessment says we need to be putting $3.3 million a year into streets. We haven't been able to put that much money into streets in decades, as I'm told, but this will get us a little bit closer with regard to 2021 funding to be able to do that, to maintain our current street network. We also, this is where we increase some funding based on a council meeting discussion that we had about 3 months ago on that sidewalk and ramp gap analysis that was conducted by Public Works. So we're proposing 250,000 there. Moving on to the last slide, homelessness, the cross-purpose center that I mentioned for career guidance, poverty eradication, we're proposing about 350,000 for that program, which will really help them build out that center and the various kind of physical components of their actions that they need to do to get set up in Inglewood. Also, there's the 850,000 for Bridge House Ready to Work, which I think you're all pretty up to speed on what they do with their facilities in both Boulder and Aurora, having a tremendous success rate in actually housing and then training people in a career so that they are in fact ready to work. And then, and apologies, Tim, I think I was going to let you go over all of these, stealing your thunder. The homelessness action plan implementation, if you could cover that, what that 350,000 is.
Sure. So this is Inglewood's portion. So essentially, Inglewood and Littleton have basically both been paying roughly the same percentage-wise, and then Sheridan's paying a little bit less given their much smaller size. So the total cost of implementation, and this doesn't include Bridge House, nor does it include a resource navigation center, but the total cost of implementation of the plan is about $750,000. The first order of business now that's been approved by all 3 cities is to basically hire a homelessness coordinator, so that the funding will this is Inglewood's portion towards that for past 1 year, and then also for startup costs in a variety of ways, such as a website, communications costs, and a few pilot initiatives as well.
Great, thanks, Tim. And so our last 2 items are the Little Dry Creek Plaza, which again, this was actually represented in your budget supplemental, but you may remember that we had to pull that out of the supplemental, and we're reallocating it here to get that project more fully funded to completely revamp Little Dry Creek Plaza. It's a constant area of concern for many of our residents as well as the business community. And then also pulled out of your budget supplemental from this summer was 350,000 for rail trail projects. We have restored that in this 500,000 for just generally walk and wheel. And so Mayor Pro Tem, this is where we added some funding based on your bike boulevard, and also added some additional funds, Councilmember Anderson, for the 15-minute city items that you expressed interest in previously. So with that, I think we're ready for questions, comments, and discussion.
Thank you for the presentation. Mayor Pro Tem is going to kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Manager Lewis. I'll ask this question of Assistant City Manager Dodd, regarding the cross-purpose career guidance line item, can you give a little bit more explanation on their purpose and then how it differs from the Bridge House as well?
Yeah, so thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The way I think about it is they're basically both sides of the same, or two sides of the same coin. So Bridge House really is meant to people who are currently homeless. Bridge House is really meant to lift them out of being homeless. So it really is targeted towards homeless individuals who are ready to work, who are ready to come off the streets, to be housed, and to go through a program. Cross Purpose is really at the other end of that spectrum. It's people who are currently housed, but who are housing vulnerable, and may become homeless. The two organizations actually have a history of working together very closely. Cross Purpose has been around for about 13 years. They are primarily in Denver. They're planning on moving here to Inglewood. They basically have 13 different sectors where they provide job train, and those are based on market needs. So it's basically there's a variety of different ways they do the training. Some of it is essentially in a classroom setting that's remote through software. Some is really hands-on, basically through internship programs. And so the money we're looking for Cross Purpose would basically be a capital build-out. Bridge House could potentially be new construction, but even if it isn't brand new construction, it's basically will be building basically a new project. Bridge House is focused, as I think we've mentioned before. It is really part of the Tri-Cities recommendations that are in the plan. And so what you see here is basically Inglewood's portion, and then the other two cities would contribute as well. But basically, they're kind of the two opposite sides. One is to help remove people from homelessness, and one is to prevent people from becoming homeless.
Any other comments, questions about the funds? Any concerns? Does it not meet the plan that you were thinking of? It all looks good to everybody? Member Cuesta.
Is that what you're seeking, is just that council agrees to the list here and then it's brought back for a vote?
Yeah, I believe that's it, right?
Well, we really need to wait for that final rule to come from Treasury before we finalize this list. But if the final rule comes out and it looks substantially similar to the interim final rule, then we think we're in pretty good shape. We do have a couple of things. Director Loh mentioned in her presentation a historic preservation category that was in your budget supplemental. I don't think that needs to be represented in this list, but we do have a couple of outstanding items to discuss at the staff level before we finalize this list. But we think we've represented council's priorities here, as well as take into account the extensive public feedback that we've gotten. So yes, we would love to have some direction if you've got substantial or even insignificant changes to the list.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Mayor.
All right. Member Ward?
Just one question. This might be a little bit sensitive, but is Cross Purpose a religious organization or in some way religious affiliated?
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
So, and City Manager Lewis, please feel free to chime in if what I'm giving isn't 100% correct. But my understanding is that there are folks in the organization that are religiously affiliated, but that it is itself, it's incorporated as a nonprofit. I believe, is that correct, Sean? Or?
Yes, and we asked that specific question when Assistant City Manager Dodd and I met with them, and they said there is nothing in their curriculum, in their program, in their process that requires any kind of religious affiliation of any sort, either for participants or participants going through it having to participate in anything that is religious. So, and I know that Mayor Olson, Member Wink, and Member Anderson have all, I'm told, been contacted by Cross Purpose. I don't know if other council members may have been as well, and they may have some additional information to share on that as well.
So if my understanding is correct, that would be the ultimate test of whether or not we were legally able to contribute government funding to the organization, is whether or not it's religious affiliated, and we checked and it passes that test.
Yes, we need to obtain their IRS filing, but we are told that they are a nonprofit, just like any non-religious nonprofit.
Perfect, thank you.
Councilmember Anderson, I think you're next.
I think so, yeah. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for all the work that's gone into this, especially the gathering the public feedback on it. And I'm really thankful that we were able to incorporate into the preliminary here, at least the cross-purpose stuff as well as the walk and wheel. I don't know if I really have anything to add on the cross-purpose. I thought Assistant City Manager Dodd did a really good job of summarizing kind of how they're more of a homelessness prevention kind of thing, which I think is really important when it comes to homelessness. Is you can keep moving people out of homelessness, but if you don't stop the flow of people into homelessness, then it just becomes a musical chairs kind of a situation. So I think there's really value here in what Cross Purpose is doing. So I'm supportive of that and appreciate you guys taking the time to meet with them and incorporate that into the plan as well. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very happy with the list and don't see a need to make any changes to this. I am going to bring up a question just because it was asked. But I did bring up the crosswalk on Broadway still scares me every single time I see somebody cross it, the one right off of 3400 South in the middle of the road. I was just asking and I guess I could ask Director DeAndre since she's here as well. From what I understand, it wasn't built to the way that it's currently in place. It's not actually the way that it should have been built based off of AASHTO's standards. So I'm just trying to understand, did we look at what the pricing would be if we were to look at making that to AASHTO standards so it could be a safer crosswalk than what we currently have today?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. It actually is in accordance with an appropriate, what we would call a rapid flashing beacon, where the pedestrian has to press the button in order to get something to change. So as you know, the yellow lights appear, which means caution, doesn't necessarily mean that people have to stop with the red light. So so it's perfectly fine right now. It was built to standards for that type of application. What we're looking at is what's called a hawk signal, which there's a few around, not in Inglewood, but there's one up on Evans near DU, where when you press the button, then the lights flash. First they flash red, then they go to all red, which means that vehicles have to stop in both directions on the street. It's a little bit more prominent than just the yellow blinking lights that we have out there. So we're exploring the cost of that to see what it would take to upgrade to that type of signal at that location.
Thank you, Director, and thanks for the explanation as well. As I stated, I don't see any major changes to this, and I'm happy to move forward as is.
Thank you. I'll just chime in since Cross Purpose was brought up in my name in terms of meeting with them. I met with them very, very early on when they were looking to move to Inglewood and asked how it would fit in with Tri-Cities homelessness policy group, and it appeared to be a really great complement to some of the other things we were doing. And I have had the same question you've had, Member Ward, about is it a religious affiliated? And I asked them point blank, and they said no, although I think several of them are motivated by their faith to care for others, so that's what's come out. But their building is partnering with a church, so I think doing the due diligence, we're going to be taking a look at that. So I know we'll do that, but we need to be asking that question. And I'm not sure we can't give to them. It's just there are other regulations that we would have to do in order to make sure that we comply with whatever state laws there are. I like the list. I think it's good. I mean, I think there's some things I'd like more on and others less, but it's fine. I think we've turned the sausage a bit with different people's perspectives, although we haven't really talked anything specifically about removing anything for a while on this, so I think it's fairly consistent. Member Cuesta?
Thank you, Mayor. For me, it'd just be proportion of spending. We've got 8.7 million here, and of that 1.55 does go to homelessness, which is 17%, close to 18%. And homelessness is certainly something that needs to be dealt with. It only made number 5 on the list, though. That to me is the only thing. I'm not sure if proportionately we've allocated things correctly, because I think homelessness certainly deserves attention. It deserves the financial attention, I think the empathy that this council and this community wants to give. But where I see it ranked and in the dollars dedicated to it, I'm not sure if everything is balanced. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, so we'll wait for it to come back with the final ruling and then any other changes that might need to happen, but it seems like you're on the right track from the majority here.
Thank you, Mayor. And if I could make one more comment, Assistant City Manager Dodd mentioned this, but the Bang the Table organization, the company, reached out to us. Our locally, that's known as Engaged Inglewood. So we don't use the term bang the table, but that company, which we use to run our community engagement, reached out to us and said, can you please, can we export how you did your public engagement with the surveys, the open-ended questions, prioritization process, and they are exporting that to other cities. So I just want to give another shout out to the communications team for their innovative approach using that technology. Thanks for the feedback tonight.
That's great to hear, because I think 790 is a lot, or whatever it was. I couldn't believe we had that many. So they really have done a great job of getting the word out. So you can let Director Hargath know. Great job. All right, I think we are on to discussion 9 of public consumption areas. And this is information and direction as well. Our City Attorney Tamara Niles is here to present and discuss the public consumption areas within the city previously authorized in response to COVID-19 effects on commerce.
Mayor and members of the commission, I'm there it is. I was waiting for the PowerPoint to come up. This is an issue that council had addressed previously in the repeal of our public consumption ordinance. And in that repeal, we allowed the temporary extension of public consumption areas within the city by staying enforcement of our city ordinance that prohibits the consumption of alcohol in public areas. And for background, on March 18th, 2020, the city adopted that emergency ordinance that authorized the city manager to issue emergency orders in response to COVID. Then Governor Polis issued executive orders suspending the prohibition against public consumption of alcohol on public right-of-ways. Then, which followed that, the city manager issued several emergency orders that authorized that public consumption within the city and certain right-of-ways and other areas within the city in an attempt to authorize patronage of our businesses within the city of Englewood. Then on July 19th, 2021, City Council adopted Ordinance 30, repealing the state of emergency, the emergency ordinance, but then again authorized the continued stay of enforcement on our ordinance prohibiting public consumption. That's a very complicated way to say that the city authorized people to continue to consume alcohol in certain areas of the city. But on July 8th, 2021, Governor Polis had signed an executive order that rescinded multiple statewide orders. So it referred to 2020-011 executive order, but those amendments included the provision that authorized a stay on the enforcement of prohibition of consumption of alcohol in public right-of-ways within the state of Colorado. And just as a point of clarification, the date on the study session memo is wrong on the governor's order. It refers to Order 125 that was adopted in August. I did correct it on the PowerPoint, but I noticed when I was sitting here that it was not corrected on the memo action. But the correct date is July 8th, 2021. With the repeal, public consumption on public right-of-ways is against the law in the state of Colorado. So while we extended our prohibition extended the stay on enforcement of our prohibition against public consumption in certain areas, the areas in which we extended that stay include public right-of-way. So by Colorado law, someone that is consuming alcohol on public right-of-way could still be cited under Colorado law, even though we're not citing them under our municipal code. So what bothers me about that as a law-abiding citizen is that someone could be under the mistaken assumption that they couldn't face any penalties for consuming alcohol on the public right-of-way if it's within our map of approved areas. They're not correct because they could still be cited for a violation of state law, even though we wouldn't prosecute them in municipal court or a municipal code violation. So I would recommend City Council consider two options. Either adopt a resolution repealing our public consumption areas, or at a minimum, amend our public consumption areas to remove public right-of-way, such as sidewalks and roadways. I have attached the maps for our public consumption areas, and as you can see, the majority of public consumption areas are public right-of-way, including Broadway and Hampton Avenue. So when we look at the public consumption area on the overlay, you can see there are large chunks of this map that are within public roads. And there's the second map that largely follows a single roadway. So my recommendation would be to repeal the public consumption area altogether. Alternatively, as I discussed with Councilmember Anderson today, the City Council could amend those public consumption areas to just include certain publicly owned property, such as parks or something like that. But either way, I highly recommend we remove any public consumption area that includes a public right-of-way, such as a street or a sidewalk. If we were to amend the public public consumption areas to remove any right-of-way, we could do so by adopting an ordinance that amends our municipal code to allow public consumption within those specific areas. Well, this is the smallest writing of all time. I apologize if you can't read it at all. I did want to make sure council and any licensees and the public know that there are additional options for outdoor consumption other than our current mechanism of the public consumption areas. They include to-go and delivery cocktails. The state now authorized that through a permitting process in which licensees apply to the state for a state permit, and then they have to follow the state regulations, which include a notice about how alcohol cannot be consumed in vehicles, and it has to be a sealed, tamper-proof container. There's also expanded outdoor seating within the city that we can authorize through city permits on city right-of-way, or that is also currently allowed for expanded outdoor seating pending the UDC rewrite. The state has also authorized communal dining areas. And this is so small, I'm going to have to pull this up on my computer. But in communal dining areas, 2 or more businesses can share an area within 1,000 feet of their business in which they can serve food and alcoholic beverages to patrons within the communal dining area. This is a new law, and I think it's an interesting way to continue to encourage patronage of businesses within the city and the state. The state has also now authorized expanded festivals in public spaces. Now it includes restaurants and bars, which is a new addition to festivals, and they can serve and sell alcohol in public spaces up to 9 times in a 12-month period, but it does have to be authorized by the state and the city for that festival. Finally, the state does allow entertainment districts, and within an entertainment district, there can be a common consumption area operated by a promotional association. And Councilmember Anderson and I spoke about this today, about what that actually means for the entertainment district. In an entertainment district, it does have to be clearly delineated. There can't be any vehicle traffic that goes through it. It does have to have physical barriers. And then businesses that border or are within the district can sell and serve alcohol in this communal area. It does require that a promotional association be created and have a board of directors and oversee and manage the entertainment district. So it's a pretty complicated, a lot of steps. The city has to create the district, promotional association has to be created and agree to run it. And I picture in my head something like an outdoor venue with live music that is bordered by various businesses with no roads running through it, something like that. So moving forward, if council agrees that we should take action, we will draft the appropriate legislation and then present it to City Council at a future meeting.
All right. Thank you for the presentation. Council, what are you thinking about related to this? Member Anderson, you can start us off.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Attorney Niles. The idea, which I spoke to you about this morning, that came to my mind was if we have businesses along there that have the right to do the to-go cocktails. I presume there's some lid on the container or whatever that people have to take to go. If they could walk down the sidewalk there and then go down to Little Dry Creek Plaza after that's been redone, it would kind of maybe approximate, what we had going during the pandemic, the opportunity to take a drink out from a bar or restaurant and walk down to a place where you could sit along the creek. Would that be within the realm of possibilities here? And what challenges would be associated with that legally?
Yes, that is absolutely within the realm of possibility. According to state law, the City Council can authorize consumption of alcohol by ordinance, resolution, or rule, except on public rights of way. So with that in mind, we could adopt an ordinance or amend city code to specifically designate areas where public consumption is authorized, as long as it's not a street or a sidewalk or an alleyway.
Okay, well, I would be interested floating that idea out there. Repeal what we have now, and then modify the ordinances to potentially allow it in the Little Dry Creek Plaza area, if council has some interest in that.
Yeah, point of information. Is that area? It's not considered a park. I don't think it is. Is it? Because parks we have no consumption in, so we'd have to change that, right?
Well, the ordinance would change that.
Would change it regardless, but just for that one area.
Whatever area council designated by ordinance or within code would then be an exception.
Thank you. Member Russell.
Thank you. But getting to that area, you would have to use a public right-of-way, which is the sidewalk along the street, to get down there.
And you can carry a to-go cocktail down the sidewalk, but it has to be sealed. It has to be in a tamper-proof. It has to be a lid that you have to remove. So they could carry it from a licensed business for takeout, and they could walk with it sealed to the other area that is allowed and consume it in that area.
And the the container, they can do that by state law with us doing nothing, correct? But designate, I am not for public consumption of alcohol. There is a reason it's been prohibited in the past. We allowed it for a state of emergency, and that state of emergency has ended, and the taverns and things like that are open. And so I believe that is unnecessary. So I would be in favor of repeal of the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Cuesta, and then Member Anderson, did you put your light back on again? Okay.
Thank you for the presentation, City Attorney. And I'm going to ask you a question that you may or may not have the information on. Do you know if we've had many violations result in people stepping outside of what we allow?
I don't know of any, but that doesn't necessarily mean there have been any. I know in my own experience with the PD, it would surprise me if they have issued a citation because of it. Instead, they take more of a counseling approach. If they see someone in violation, I would anticipate they would counsel someone. This area is not allowed, but this area is. But I will look into that and find out.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Others, what do you think of this? Member Ward.
Mayor, I was going to just interject.
Oh, go ahead, City Manager.
Thank you.
They need to turn you up a bit.
To Member Cuesta's question, I did speak to police leadership during the block party, and they told me that they had not issued any citations for that violation.
Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Member Ward.
I think this is where my somewhat libertarian streak comes in. I favor whatever model is least restrictive. And I would like to see some modification to the state law to bring it closer to what we were doing. I don't know if that's something we can advocate for with our peers through CML or some other lobbying organization, but I would be in favor of that. I think the model that we had during the emergency worked really well. I don't anticipate some other state agent coming in and acting against us, even if we just leave things as the status quo, but I understand also that's not the best way to make public policy. So whatever solution we can come up with that is least restrictive is the one that I favor, and going forward, I'd like to try to work on a plan that reinstates, however possible, what we were doing during the emergency, because I think that was working as well.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Sierra.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Attorney. Just, I guess, a couple of questions. So is the paseo considered right-of-way as well, public right-of-way?
I don't believe that it is, but because it's my understanding that that we now have paseos, there used to be buildings. Mm-hmm. And generally, when that's the case, it's a deeded land ownership. But to be able to confirm, I would have to double check the deed records and confirm how we received the property. But in general, as long as it wasn't a plat or a conveyance specifically for public right-of-way, it would be a deeded interest that we own and that we could authorize consumption.
Right. And then on your slide that that was very hard to read, you had 5 of those different options. I know that Denver has some of these common consumption areas as well. So do they fall under one of these 5? The milk market being the most prominent one that I'm aware of, but.
For common consumption areas would generally fall under the entertainment district.
Okay.
And I'm happy to look at the exact mechanism used there. Now, there could also be a communal dining area, but this is new. So if it pre-exists this summer, most likely it's an entertainment district.
Okay. And do you mind if I ask a question about, is there a license, or does anything have to take place for the business to designate themselves as a communal dining area, or?
Yes. So they have to go together and they have to apply. There has to be at least 2. It can't just be one business.
Right.
It doesn't have to be connected to the area. It just has to be within 1,000 feet. And then they do have to fill out joint applications. They have to be licensed. There is an entire process. Almost everything regarding alcohol is pretty regulated by the state. The state oversees it and issues licenses and ensures compliance.
All right. Thank you.
Others want to weigh in? Member Cuesta, did you want to weigh in any further?
Sure. I'm going to go out on a limb here and try and speak from recollection of what I've heard from the businesses in that area. And I think most have been in support. And I would beg any business in that area, if I have misspoken and they do oppose this, please send me an email, give me a call, and I'll correct myself on the record here. But it seems that most of the feedback we've received from business in the area has been supportive. To that note, if the businesses in the area have supported it, if we haven't had people getting out of control and citations or violations issued, I'm inclined to move forward. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So I guess we're ready to have you work on it to bring it forward when it, yeah. I think we need to bring it forward to vote on it. I think the businesses have asked for it. And there was a lot of confusion over the block party as to why they couldn't have that then and the state law that went with it. But Yeah.
Just for my clarification, move forward with just removing right-of-way or
Oh, yeah,
move
that's
forward
right.
with an overall repeal of our current mechanism of stay of enforcement?
Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead.
My preference would be the second one, amend the public consumption area for the public right of way. So that would be my preference. And it's unfortunate that we got into this point because it's something that I feel is working, but I understand the fact that state and municipal law may be banging here. So I'd rather go with number 2 here.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Member Anderson.
And I guess what I was suggesting is something along the lines of 2, which would be still allowing the Little Dry Creek Plaza to be public consumption area, and possibly more areas if they're useful in there. I did think I thought that the state was working on expanding the allowance for entertainment districts this year. Did that ever come to? Is that what? Because this is a pre-existing law, if I understand right. They aren't planning on revising that. Or is there anything in the works at state level?
I can't answer that off the top of my
Okay.
head, but I will find out.
Okay, thank you.
Assistant City Manager Dodd, did you have something from the legislature that speaks to that? I don't recall what happened with it, but I do know something was. I know you gave us some reports
Yes,
even.
I think there were a few pieces of legislation that tangentially related to this, so I can look at them tomorrow and through a council request, I can make sure we're providing the up-to-date information on it.
Okay, great. Would you like that? Yeah, okay, great. Member Ward? Wood. Oh my
Just
gosh.
one more thing. Your presentation covers this a little bit. It says, basically, if we decide not to make any changes, we risk a citizen getting written up by another agency other than our police department. But is there some associated risk to the city of just leaving the stay in place for the time being? Do we get our hands slapped by somebody, or?
I can't imagine that LED would like it, but legally they can't do anything or take any sort of responsive action based on the fact that we are not enforcing our own ordinance in a certain area.
So it's not a great way to make friends, but other than that,
Right.
okay.
All right, so it's, have you heard enough? Is it number 2 that we're looking at then?
I think what I've heard is bring forward legislation that would just remove the public rights of way.
Is that what it was? Yeah, I think it was, yeah. 4, I think you had, yeah, I think so. I'm getting mixed up in the numbers here, and I also, yeah. So would that include expanding the seating area or no? Or expanding the area to Little Dry Creek?
We could.
Because that's a conversation that maybe we need to have separately from this.
Point of
think
information.
Yeah.
I think is Little Dry Creek already included in what we're talking about in terms of public consumption areas?
But that's the question, isn't it? I don't think it
Yeah.
was. I don't think it is it?
The plaza there is. It
Yeah, it
appears
looks
to
like it
be.
on the map.
Yeah.
Then what were you asking before?
Well, that was the main portion that I was suggesting we leave in place, was that little funny triangle down on the bottom left of the green area there, for public consumption. So it sounds like that's actually number 2, basically.
Okay. Member Russell?
Thank you, Mayor. So if we do this for this area, should we, what's going to keep the people from farther south on Broadway requesting the same thing, or the people down by Federal requesting the same thing? So are we going to cover the whole city with this?
Nothing would prohibit anyone from coming forward and requesting additional areas. That would just be a policy decision for City Council to determine whether you wish to move forward.
So at this time, we're only going to address this area right here?
That's my understanding, yes.
Thank you.
That was the only area that we'd approved during the pandemic too, so. Pardon? What was the other one?
This is the second consumption area on the map, but it appears to me it's entirely public right-of-way. So it appears to me this one will simply have to be eliminated, unfortunately. Well,
Right.
depending on your perspective, whether it's unfortunate or not.
Okay, thank you. Member Ward? All right, do you think you have enough from us?
I think so, yes. At least I'll bring a draft forward, and if it's not exactly right, we can certainly change it.
And we'll confuse everybody in the process. Great. That ends agenda item 9. And next is any reports from boards and commissions or council liaison work? It's kind of an off week. So moving on then to, oh, go ahead, Member Anderson.
I actually did have, not KEB, the Sustainability Commission this last week. Not too much to report other than Assistant City Manager Dodd ran through this sustainability plan in our strategic plan with the commission, and several of the commissioners kind of had questions about how they were going to work with city council and had some suggestions on sustainability stuff. So I think that we're still kind of in the process of transition, figuring out how this commission is going to function moving into the future. And but there's kind of an excitement around it, around seeing this change. So that's all I have to report.
Councilmember Anderson, do you know how many are moving off or term limited off at this point by chance? Just by chance?
I don't know of any that are term limited at this point, but there are only, I think there are only, or under what we should, I think there's only 5 or 6 on the commission, and I think we're allowing for 9 under the new ordinance. So we will need to appoint several commissioners.
Okay, great. All right, next agenda item is council members' choice, leading off with an executive session for a conference with the city attorney, and I will read the information here. So I move to go into consecutive executive sessions tonight for a conference with the city attorney for the purpose of receiving legal advice on special legal questions under C.R.S. Section 24-6-4024B. Present at the executive session will be the following persons: Mayor Linda Olson, Mayor Pro Tem Nathaniel Sierra, Council members Rita Russell, Joe Anderson, Dave Cuesta, Stephen Ward, City Manager Sean Lewis, City Attorney Tamara Niles, Director of Utilities in South Platte Renew Peter Van Rye, and Special Counsel Peter Nichols. May I have a second?
Mayor, I
Sorry.
wanted to identify that City Manager Sean Lewis will not be able to attend this meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so we will take him off then. The rest are still going to be there. May I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Can we please vote?
Mayor, I just have a point of order before we vote.
Yeah.
Specific legal questions. Is there some way we could state the category of legal question we will be discussing without compromising the purpose of the meeting? I have no idea what this is for, so I'd like to know before I vote.
Yes, Councilmember Ward, we will be discussing legal issues regarding potential litigation.
Thank you.
So may I have a second? I have one, Mayor Pro Tem, so please vote.
Sorry, point of information too.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm understanding there are 2 executive sessions we're voting on.
It did say 2 here, but it's not. It's only 1,
Well,
right? I think the wording of this is incorrect. It
Okay.
says consecutive. That is not correct, right?
That is not correct.
Okay.
It is only one session.
It's
right?
only 1.
Okay,
Apologize about
sorry,
that.
that
Yep.
would surprise me, so I just wanted to make sure. Okay, thank you. I'm prepared to vote now.
All right, please vote. Take the vote, thanks.
Member Anderson,
Aye.
Member Cuesta,
Aye.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Sierra,
Aye.
Member Ward,
Aye.
Mayor Olson.
Aye.
6 ayes.
Thank you. We will now exit this meeting and reconvene in the Pikes Peak room on the 3rd floor.
She walked that way. I'm not sure.
So that camera's mounted. And then are these PTZs? Yep, all PTZs here. There, there.
Did they find you? They were looking for you. I don't know. They were for you? City judge? Yeah, she was looking for you. For what? I don't know. She didn't tell. We're not the yeah. I was like, oh, she walked that way.
Arguing twice the price.
Right. Can you believe this discussion like that for us? Wait, what? Can you believe this discussion like that?
Charge quick. If you don't mind, I'll borrow your help charger for a few seconds. We'll charge quick. Okay, good. If you go to airplane mode, it'll be lightning. Oh, really? Yeah, I bet it can charge the whole thing in 20 minutes. Yeah. Airplane mode. What are you at? 14? 14. 13 when I plugged it in. We're getting there. It's good, other than the stupid notifications for our other meeting. Oh, did you?
But consecutive executive sessions, because I used the one that we used at the last one when they had two of them. And I left consecutive on there. And I sent that to like two other people look at it. And so then like the people are, like, I just know the conspiracy theorists and I'm like, they had two executive sessions, but they didn't say it.
All four people, right? All four conspiracy theorists watching?
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, right. I forgot to change. So when I was going to college, I was either going to Notre Dame, Wisconsin, or CU. I had a visit with the Wisconsin coach. and golf. And he said, "You're in. I'm not going to give you a scholarship. You've got a spot on the team. You'll be able to travel after your first semester. You transfer. Perfect. Go home, write him a thank you letter." Notre Dame recruiter calls me. I go back to write the coach to Notre Dame a letter. It was right when Macintosh just came out. I go to my buddies, change everything in the body. Don't change the coach's name. My mom was an Irish Catholic from Chicago, whose dad had season tickets to Notre Dame when he was alive. The recruiter tells my uncle before the coach gets this letter, Roddy's in, and he's going to get help because his grades are so good, they're going to give him academic help. Uncle tells my dad, who tells my mom, I'm at work, Mom goes, a letter from Notre Dame came. I'm like, is it an envelope, like a big envelope or a little envelope? She's like, it's a little one. I'm like, oh shit, he caught it. Because I had figured it out, but I was not about to tell my mother. Oh, I told my mom like 5 years ago. Oh, that's funny. She's like, you can hear her breaking up when she's reading me the letter on the phone. We regret to inform you. This is wrong, this is wrong. I'm like, I'm gonna have to go to the grave with this one. I can't tell her her son is an idiot. She should know, but
Doing the pooch
down the way.
Yeah.
So I lived with that one for 30 years.
That's a big one. I'll live with this one for the.
Yeah. Till you get in the car and there's a good song on. Yeah.
So, but in the 25 months of that, I've been tired from that.
See, what did I tell you, John? What did I tell you? Even if it takes an hour,
We're still be good. I'd say we still. You're like, that's it.
Yeah, I think my over money is dead money right now, so.
How are the wings? Did you try the wings? It was 2 weeks ago when we were having a wing discussion.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if she got.
No, I haven't done yet. From Puerto Vallarta?
Besides, it's, Casa Vallarta.
Casa Vallarta. It's Vallarta,
Yeah.
but it has
Right.
Vallarta in it. And it's in
Right.
Aurora. I know that.
Right.
much.
And it's her SO that's into the wings, so
Yes.
I mean, I don't know, if she have to drag it there.
I don't know, maybe if we were there.
At least it's not her PO.
Right.
How'd you know I had one?
Yeah, we assumed. Rightly. You know, I went to high school with, do you know who Lucas Glover is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to high school with him.
We did.
And he played golf in high school, you know, and I wasn't really playing golf in high school yet, but it was funny, I didn't know he went pro until I was like volunteering for, I think it was called like the Buy.com tour or something at the time. Oh, yeah. So I was working on the base in Virginia, and we had to like volunteer for something. And I was like, oh, me and my buddy were like, oh, we'll volunteer for this golf tournament that's coming into town. So, you know, and so I ended up out on the course, just like, you know, we were playing a ton of golf at the time.
Right.
But I was just ended up out on the course, like pointing a microphone at like where they hit their second shot from.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? So you're just getting the
The
sound.
parabolic mic, yeah.
Yeah. And I see all these guys playing, and I see Lucas Glover, and I was like, oh shit, I know that guy. Like, he was high school. Yeah, everything's going good. And then like it was a couple years after that, he won the Open.
Yeah. Career money. Want to take a guess?
How much you got?
His career earnings on tour.
Career
2 mil.
That's what he made this year.
Really?
Wait, I'm gonna guess. I'll guess.
26 million.
Okay.
That's pretty damn good.
But.
I was gonna say 630,000, so I was
He's
still
had to
under.
pay a lot of legal fees due to significant other trauma.
Well, you know what, that's what I was saying, is that was crazy to me, how like his
Story of
college.
the cops on his ass.
Yeah, and that was, and, but that's what I thought was crazy about him, is I was all like, man, this dude is kicking ass, I'm not kicking ass, you know, and then this story comes out where his wife is just talking all this bad shit to him, and stuff, and I was like, okay, well, that's their own shit, I guess. Everybody's got their issues. Yeah, 2,600 million, so that's on course. So it's probably made close to 15 off. Oh, you think so? Sponsorships and stuff. Sponsorship, corporate outings. Right. I mean, when I was playing, so call it 2001, if you made it through tours, you got one of the 25 spots. You made 300 grand that day. Really? You had, because you get a hat deal, ball deal, a bag deal. Really? You know, just for making it. If you made it through the finals, without, before you even got into a tournament, you made 300 for the year. He won a major. Right. I mean, that's worth 10. Probably. Just Xerox has you come out. Right. Yeah, you to hang out on a Monday. Yeah, you the guy would right. You just go give a clinic and play 18 with 4 or hit shots with bounce around with groups that day. Wow. That's worth 200 grand. Because the guy, when the Open was at Cherry Hills in '78, Andy North, who won it, was good friends with my daddy, stayed at our house. And I mean, he's won 2 majors and 2 other tournaments. Yeah, sure. He'd have corporate outings like all the time. Fly out on a Monday. Yeah. Get on a plane, fly back. $100 grand that day, play golf. Yeah. Back in the day, I mean, he was making that, but yeah, well, a couple grand probably still. He was probably making 10, 20. Yeah. Certainly enough to afford the first class ticket. Yeah. That you stay out with. Yeah. Miss a day of practice.
Shit, yeah, I never was that good.
Well, neither was I. I did it for 2 years, and when you pay to do your job, it's called a hobby.
Right, right.
I had qualified for the Buy.com New Mexico Albuquerque Country. I birdied 4 of the last 5 for 64. 156 guys for 14 spots. Right. Okay? I walk up to the scoreboard, the guy I'm traveling with the skate. What would shoot? It's 67. I'm out. And I'm like, that sucks. Don't leave though. Caddy for me this week. Right. And then I'll get your entry fees for the next 3 tournaments. And he's like, what the fuck did you shoot? I'm like, I birdied 4 of the last 5 for 64. He goes, bro, you're not in a playoff. Really? 8 guys for 7 spots at 63. Dang. 7 guys shot better than 63. I'm like, okay. Yeah. That's all I got. So that's everything.
Yeah, I put out my A game today.
That is better than I thought I could be. And it ain't good enough.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll drive home from Albuquerque now.
Yeah.
At about 110.
Man, when I watched that, I know it was a couple weeks ago now, but that sudden death with DeChambeau.
Oh, Cantlay.
And Cantlay, and I was like, that has got to be the highest pressure show I've ever seen in my, I could not imagine, you know.
There was 4 playoff holes? 6.
6.
But if DeChambeau wins, Cantlay doesn't win Player of the Year. He doesn't win 15 million. He doesn't. No, he didn't win 15 million that day, but he put him in the spot to win it the next week.
Yeah, well, if DeChambeau could hover shit that day.
And yeah, that day, yeah. Oddly enough, and Cantlay kept putting himself in positions where he had to make 10 putts. Like they weren't for birdie; they were to survive.
Right.
And
Yeah,
he just
exactly.
kept burying them.
Yeah, to survive. Yeah. Bryson would just have like, you know,
Have
a
an
6-footer to win. Yeah.
Listen. Luxor, Egypt. That doesn't look like the Luxor. Luxor. Where's the slot machine? Where's the? We went to the Luxor once back when we were going every year. When we were in our 20s or whatever. And one day Craig Fallon was like, "We gotta go to the Luxor." I'm like, "Those tables suck. You never went to the Luxor." And we get over there, and he'd go to like the mechanical horse racing, not the real horse racing, like the thing you could get at Showbiz or Chuck E. Cheese. Right. And he'd sit there and spray water into the hole, pumping $10 chips and stuff in there. I'm like, "What are you doing? This is rigged." He goes, "It's all rigged. It's all rigged. This is entertaining." It's all rigged. And that's the only thing to me that's tough with going to Vegas now is it's like, cause usually I like to play craps, you know. But if it's like you can't find a table that's under like a $20-$25 minimum bet, it's too freaking expensive. You get wiped out in an hour. Yeah, I know, and especially the way I like to play is where, you know, you can sort of get a couple numbers covered, you know. And, oh yeah, play the pass line, and then and then put in the come box and get and blanket the board. Right, get the board, give a nice coverage on the board. But then somebody craps out, and it's like, oh, that's $200 slide off the table. Yeah. Well, and then you're, you know, give me the hard ways, give me something for the deal. Like I want to be there. Yeah. I need like a $5 crap table. That's why I like going to freaking go downtown. Yeah, Blackhawk or what's it called by Springs? What's that place called? Oh, there's a casino down there? Yeah, by Springs. Oh yeah, it's called. I can't think of it. It's like an old gold mine there too. Cripple Creek, that's what it is. Should they have $3 craps tables down there last time I was down there? How far is Cripple Creek? God, I haven't been there in years. Dude, it is 2 hours, just a little over 2 hours, I think. So Blackhawk's closer. Yeah, Blackhawk is a little closer. Where do you go up there? Blackhawk, the last time I went up there, we went to, gosh, let me think.
On my 21st birthday, they changed the rules to be able to limit for because we changed the 18 when I turned 21, so it used to be 21. So on April 1st, when I turned 21, they changed it. I started with soccer, I was right out of school. Yes. My aunt got me a computer when I was little girl, and she was driving me. And so we got out of soccer, stuff on all the together, and I got a computer. And it was a yeah. Fun to learn. Yeah. So that's why I started like 3 windows.
Yeah, we went to the Monarch. That was good. It's okay. There was another one right close to But you know, it surprised me going up to Blackhawk that it was not that much different than Cripple Creek, other than it's bigger, you know. But the way they have like the casinos where it's like, the casino's on this side of the road and then like the hotel's kind of over here on this side of the road, like they do. I don't know why it's weird. I haven't been up there in years. I haven't been up there since like before craps. It was just blackjack and poker. Oh, really? Yeah, they've got pretty big, I mean, nothing compared to Vegas, obviously.
Yeah, I remember. The guy
You still watching that football game? I just wanted to see what the score was if you.
Yeah, Dallas just scored again, like 34 points.
Oh, so no need to watch. I usually like to not like the Cowboys, but watched Hard Knocks this year. You know, yeah, it's just you know you start rooting for them. It seemed like yeah, they did seem like a good team. Yeah.
You see they're doing like the mid-season Hard Knocks?
Mid-season Hard Knocks. Yeah. With who? Yeah, with the Colts. My friend was telling me that. I was like, that seems like you're almost giving up too much insider information during the season. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. But that's
They're already dialed back on how many meetings, the conversations they have in meetings.
Yeah,
the
that's
stuff
the
they
thing.
show.
Because I think the old school Hard Knocks was a lot better. It gave
Way
you,
better.
It gave you insight that was never really anywhere else in the NFL. And even this season, I was like, oh, this is totally different. I
Just like
remember,
everything they dumb, NFL dumbs it down.
dude, it made me laugh one year. I can't remember what team it was on. They were playing for, but it was Pac-Man Jones.
Cincinnati Bengals. Yeah, it's Peter Schaefer, the guy who cuts his agent.
Is it Jones?
Dumbest thing, just making it rain.
But they pull up to him and he's on the side of the road in this drop top Bentley. And they're like, what's wrong? He's like, man, I forgot to look at the gas, ran out of gas. I was like, you fucking idiot.
That was a great season because it was Ocho Cinco,
Oh, yeah.
Pac-Man.
I was, that's what they had, Ocho Cinco. He was,
the linebacker.
oh, what an idiot.
And just watching Hugh Jackson is just screw everything up all the time. No, Marvin Lewis. Now he just stands next to Herm down in Phoenix. No, he's just a consultant. He didn't even have a headset on. Consultant. He's just standing there next to Herm. When Herm says something, he just goes, yeah. Like he it's
Good
would have
idea.
been what my job would be if Drew got a real job. Right? They got a real coaching job.
What do you think, Ronnie?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, you know, that was the thing that I feel like in older seasons of Hard Knocks that you just don't get now, is just to be able to realize the volume of guys that are coming to that spring training and are not gonna play in the NFL.
Yep.
You know, and it's.
Well, that was, I
tons of
mean,
guys.
Hard Knocks. There was Hard Knocks before there was a practice squad.
Right, yeah. Yeah, you're
Right?
right. There was no practice
When
squad.
the practice squad came on, I think it was pretty close. It was like 2 years, 2 seasons of Hard Knocks, and then they put in the practice squad.
Yeah, yeah, we could have some people on the practice squad. And then it was like, well, we got cut.
Or it may have been, it was right around there.
Tell you what.
Well, the first 5 years of the practice squad, you had to be a year 1 or year 2 player. Once you were on a roster, you were ineligible. If you made it past the initial, if you made it through a season on a roster,
Yeah.
you couldn't be put on a practice squad.
Oh, I see.
Now it's, I mean, they're huge.
Le'Veon Bell's on a practice squad. Really?
Yeah. Or, yeah, I think for, the Ravens.
That dipshit. That guy cost himself a lot of money.
A lot of money. That's a lot of wasted talent.
Bad advice. You think you're bigger than the game.
I'll tell you what, though, I mean, I did not expect it this season, but to be 3-0. The Chiefs lost 2 straight. I know. And I think it'll depend
Like
when
the
we.
3 worst teams.
Yeah,
in the
I know. But what I think is if we can get some momentum, we could play
Without
your guards, without your slot receiver. Yeah, without everyone that's hurt. Two receivers, two of your three best receivers. Geisler's out. He didn't play the second half. Glasgow might come back, from what I heard. Hamlet's out. Judy's out. Chubb's out. There's some other linebackers there. Also, I was thinking Judy's out. Yeah, Judy's out. No, not Judy. Josie. He sucks. Joel's out. But why he's improved, don't give him that, but he sucks. Why are they letting Josie Jewell wear 47 though? Like, why did they not retire 47? Because that's Lynch's number. He was like, that's Gerald Wilhite's number. Oh, really? Mississippi Mudball? No, that was Sammy Weiner. Gerald Wilhite did before. That was back when I was here, before I was here. Because Lynch. This was a bunch. I don't know, man. Manning, you could split. Manning broke all the records here. Yeah. He got another Super Bowl here. Did Lynch win one with Tampa and two with the Broncos? Did he win one with the Broncos? Yeah, I think he did. Let's see. No, he wasn't. That was Atwater. Atwater and, who was the other safety? The D-backs were Ray Crockett, Darian Gordon, Atwater. How many Super Bowls did John Lynch win? Yeah, and then if they could play good against the Raiders, then it would show me. One Super Bowl. Oh, so he didn't even get one. No, he was in the midterm. Yeah. That dude is John Lynch. I mean, special guy. Really, really great guy. You'd think I'd know taking the traffic. We were watching a thing the other day about ESPN just had up like a football life or whatever. And it was on James Harrison. Man, that was the baddest fucking dude. Yeah, the baddest dude walked out. Just an absolute monster. Oh, chicken. I sat next to the guy on the bus to the Super Bowl, and I can't remember who it was. We're sitting in Autonabasa is playing Big Pun, still not a player, and it just came out. And Chicken looks at me and goes, "You'll like this song." All James Harrison's like workout videos of stacking all the 45s. Yeah, just you couldn't get as more 45s on the sled. Yeah, I just remember seeing those workouts where it's like you couldn't put another 45 on the sled. We were watching that thing on football, and they were showing where he would get on he must have had 5 45 plates hanging, just doing dips with it, you know? Yeah, it's like the chain around his waist. Yeah, just animal. Yeah, jeez. He'd tackle that pillar. Yeah, and it would go down for sure. He's a bad son of a bitch. Yeah, do not come across the middle of this field. All right, let's wrap it up. We're at 9 right now. It would be super sweet. Do we have anything after? City manager's choice. He's not even. parents are there right now. Well, the mayor's trying to fix my car. They call me like, you haven't even had dinner yet. Same boat. Well, you don't have to buy two cars. I hired the car. Yeah, I know. Shutting out the Jets is like beating up for a target kid. I mean, they look good. They look better than I expected. Yeah. But they're dinged up and they play donkeys.
And the Giants just got beat by the Falcons too.
Yeah, that was true. The Giants are pretty good. The Giants are terrible. Like, well, they should have won the Washington game. And I go, yeah, but they lost behind it. They should have won the Falcons. They lost on the last second field goal. Lost. Jets. And who was the Jets? I mean, who's worse? The Falcons are the only other team that's in that level of terrible. I mean, the Texans are better than those teams. Yeah, of course. It makes sense. I mean, if they were healthy, I would still be.
Oops, 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 oops. Doesn't matter. Where is member Quest? Did he get lost on the way down? Oh, he went to the restroom, right? Did he go into the restroom? Are we streaming still? Yeah, all right, great. The time is now 9:15 and the executive session has been concluded. Present at the executive session were the following people: Mayor Linda Olson, Mayor Pro Tem Othaniel Sierra, Council members Rita Russell, Joe Anderson, Dave Cuesta, Steve Ward, and City Attorney Tamara Niles, Director of Utilities, South Platte Renew, Peter Van Rye, and Special Counsel Peter Nichols. I move to close the executive session. May I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Please vote.
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Cuesta?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Sierra?
Aye.
Member Ward?
Aye.
Mayor Olson?
Aye.
6 ayes.
For the record, if any person who participated in the executive session believes that any substantial discussion of any matters not included in the motion to go into the executive session occurred during the executive session, or that any improper action occurred during the executive session in violation of the open meetings law, I would ask that you state your concerns for the record. Any concerns? Seeing none, the next agenda item is the continued council member's choice. Does anybody else have anything they wanted to say tonight? Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. I had brought up the week before we had the baby that I was interested in seeing if we wanted a council member on Code Next and volunteered on the Code Next committee and volunteered to do that. Now that I'm a few weeks past that, I wanted to see if that if there was any further thoughts on that, any interest in that. Certainly, it's just the will of council, but I think it would be valuable to have a voice from City Council on that committee. So I don't know what the appropriate process is for that.
They've already started, right? They've gotten going.
I believe so,
They've
yes.
had how many meetings, do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about it now, or we could put it on a study session too, right? Let's see if we have enough people even want it on a study session.
Okay.
So maybe everybody weighs in.
Yeah, could we weigh in?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
So
Thank you.
you would like that, okay?
Actually, do you mind if I ask a question before? I put the
Sure.
City Attorney, is there any issue with having a council member on the Code Next committee since they are looking at Title 16?
We actually drafted a council response on this topic. You can appoint someone, and all it would take would be a voice vote, to appoint someone to that committee. But they have already started meeting, I know, and we listed some pros and cons from the committee's perspective as to why you may want to consider or may not want to consider an appointment to it.
Did you read all
I
of
did.
this?
I read the response, and I was in favor of the pros.
Okay. Any other questions before you each weigh in as you do your own council report? No. All right, who would like to go next? I'll just go on down the row otherwise. Member Russell?
I don't think I have anything. There was something I was thinking of earlier that I might talk about, but I don't remember it right now, and I didn't have an opportunity to write it down. So if I can have a chance to circle back if I remember.
Sure.
I appreciate it. I really am not interested in appointing a council member to the Code Next committee because planning and zoning, the entire commission is pretty heavily involved in that, and council will get an opportunity to review it and to weigh in on it. So I'm not in favor of that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Member Cuesta.
I'm firmly against that. I think it gives, and we've seen tonight, we have very differing views in some cases, and it gives one member the opportunity to shape what that policy that comes before council will be. I think it puts council in a vulnerable position because people will say that exact thing, that, well, yeah, so-and-so was on the council, and of course this thing kind of goes that way. I think it puts any one single council member in a point of vulnerability, even if they volunteer for it, and I think it can just bring the whole council in the process that is going to be extremely valuable and extremely long running. What difference does it make to have a council member there if it could call or even bring up a misperception that somebody was able to move things in their favor? Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ward?
I'm sensitive to Member Cuesta's concerns. I read the staff memo. I didn't really think that there was anything compelling that would prohibit it, but you bring up a good point, Member Cuesta, that there are 7 of us, and to have one member on the committee potentially shepherding or steering or directing or otherwise bumping the committee in a certain direction might result in an outcome that would be different than what would come to council otherwise, or might be something that we wouldn't all agree on. So I think I'm with Member Cuesta on this. I think we leave well enough alone.
Thank you. Anything else tonight?
Nothing to report.
No, sorry, Member Cuesta. I don't think I asked you that either. All right, Mayor Pro Tem.
Nothing to report tonight. I still don't have an issue with the city council member sitting on the Code Next committee. I may be in the minority on that, but yeah, I would be happy to bring it up to a study session though.
When we made the Budget Advisory Committee, this was the question, whether or not the Budget Advisory Committee would have one council member on it and it would influence that committee. And so we put 2 on it. And we kind of went in between. Are they both on, or is one an alternate, or whatever? And it kind of became this funny little thing. But the reality was the Budget Advisory Committee was not taking our entire budget and presenting us a budget and saying this is what we're going to do, like Code Next is going to do, or and have that many people weighing in. So it's different, I think. And if we put 2 on that one, I'd say we have to put 2 on this one. But in general, I think because of that, the planning and zoning is on it, though, I think we should leave well enough alone. This body, the next body, will be the ones who gets to decide what to pick and choose from it. And that's your role, to watch it as it's going on. And I really think the citizens need to feel like they did this and there's no one person. If we had more that wanted to do it, I'd say let's put 2 on that have really different views on how land is thought about. So with that as another idea, I'm throwing you an olive branch with that, but I'm not sure anybody else would be a taker anyway.
Well, thank you, council, for considering it. I'll consider that a no, a hard no.
All right. I think that's it. City manager's choice.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things this evening. First of all, trying to get to this. My notes, just to let you know that our HR director did start today, Sean Weisky. And so we're going to have 2 Seans in the organization, which may mean that I become J. Sean, or maybe he's HR Sean, I'm not sure. But we are excited, and we'll be introducing him to you all next week. And then as was alluded to tonight, we now have received our final city in the Tri-Cities that has approved the action plan, the homelessness action plan. So we had a good meeting today with the city managers' offices of each of our 3 cities, Littleton, Sheridan, Inglewood, to really discuss next steps, particularly as it relates to a potential IGA with the county. The county is really looking to get more involved in this area. And so we really need to decide as Tri-Cities how we want to interact with that county-wide effort. And so we are proposing, as part of the funding that was mentioned tonight, that we would have a homelessness coordinator for our 3 cities. That would be a shared cost between the 3 cities, and how that would then flow into a county-wide system. So we expect to see some information coming to you, and I'll try to keep you updated as discussions progress with the county on that IGA. And then I also just wanted to end by mentioning that this is really conference season, and last week Tim Dodd, Tamara Niles, Crystal Lay in the prosecutor's office, we all attended the CML conference along with city managers, city attorneys, and city councils from across the region. It was in Westminster, and went through a lot of great classes and sessions. And hopefully that was useful. Next week, both Tim and I will be in Portland for ICMA's annual conference. And that's a little more intense conference that goes from early in the morning to late in the evening. We will look at the council agenda for next week and make sure that we have city manager's office coverage where needed, but both of us will be out of town for that. And Monday night is typically a pretty busy night of that conference. So, but we'll talk to the mayor manager about scheduling and as well as the leadership team. But please let us know if you have any questions or concerns. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Russ, I forgot to come back to you. Did you remember anything? No? Okay. Thank you for that update. I am just thrilled that we have all 3 cities that have now voted yes, and this can move forward. It's an exciting time for the city. And I also want to say with council, the council that will be on next year, I hope that CML moves back to the summer for purpose, but I don't know if it will or not. But I strongly encourage you, I could not go because it was on a school night for me, to go. The CML can be incredibly helpful, and just, being with other council members from around the state, the city, is just really, really useful, and it's not that expensive for us to participate. They had more participation in this one because it was in Westminster than they ever expected. So it may not be in the mountains anymore. It may always be down here. So, no, where is it going next year? Is it in June?
It's back to Breckenridge.
Oh, it is. Okay, well
maybe
then
in 2
definitely
years
go.
back to Census. Yeah.
It's a great place to go. So I just want, because we haven't gone for a while, both online or, I went last year online, but no one else. I just really encourage you to take up that training. So I think this meeting is, no, we don't do it with her anymore. It's not even on the agenda. I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight.